All right, I think we're live here. We have Scott here with us. 大家好，我们现在上线了，然后我们会给大家大概几分钟的时间，然后呢就是来上线，然后跟我们打个招呼。我这边在处理一些东西，那大家请稍等，我们一下就开始哦。I want to get started in just a little bit. All right, is Dan on with us now? Alright, 我们一下就开始。各位朋友们好，大家好，可以打个招呼，跟 Scott 打个招呼。我们一下就开始。Everybody get comfortable. 大家倒一杯酒，歇一下，休息一下。Scott, I wonder if your Taiwan team is going to be here.
Hopefully, I sent them the messages earlier in the week to let them know that this was going on. So hopefully they're picking it up and sharing it. But if they are there, hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. Yeah. And to everyone else who's watching, of course, not just to the people in Taiwan that I know already.
Yeah, I think Angel. I think I spoke with an Angel.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, Dan says a friend of mine says he's out with the family, but he'll check out the replay later.
Excellent.
Alright. 那大家可以打个招呼。让我们知道谁在线上。
So it's just gone 8 o'clock with you, is that right?
Yeah, 8:05.
Nice.
Hear a little bit of music there?
There we go, yeah.
Little elevator music.
Yeah, it certainly is, isn't it? It's the old supermarket music.
Yeah. 让大家听一些轻松的 jazz. Okay, look at that. Speak of the devil, huh? Or speak of the angel.
Hi, Angel.
Can you see the comments on the side?
I can. I was in private chat, but it's only me and you, so.
Okay.
Perfect. Hi, everyone.
I see Angel and Ting Chun Liu or Zhang Zhang. Hello. 大家好。大家今天有准备好自己的那个汤马丁吗？今天我们会试这款，这个是他们的汤马丁14年。那这是 their port cask， 波特桶。然后呢，我今天有自己拿一些自己的酒款出来，这个是一个老版本的汤马丁单桶原酒，2006年的 15年，没有是才9年而已，It's only 9 years actually.
Yeah.
But excellent. It's excellent. And then we can see this one here.
Yeah, the beautiful 30-year-old. Wonderful, wonderful whiskey. That.
将30年。所以我们今天有这几个 ，we have these, 3 beautiful guests joining us for a tasting today.
Yeah, not bad guests to have at a dinner party, eh?
Yeah. Not bad, not too shabby. That's what they say. All right.
And that old bottle you have, is that a sherry cask in that 2006?
It is a sherry cask.
Yeah.
Because it's one of, I imagine it's a butt because it's 648 bottles.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we occasionally bottle single casks. A few of them actually go over to Taiwan, but like the young sherry cask Tomatin's really, really lovely stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I feel like I can appreciate about Tomatin because it's the liquid itself is kind of like a very clean canvas, right? So I think it really expresses the cask really well.
Yeah.
Because you guys do have a very kind of a clean, a very pleasant juice already.
Yeah. So when we start talking about the history, I'll start telling you a little bit about how we came to create that style of liquid. But what I always say about our new mixed spirit is it's very versatile. You can put it into a lot of different woods and a lot of different casks, and you can really, you can focus on the cask if you want, or you can marry it with other things to have the spirit showing itself. But yeah, there's a lot we can do with our spirit, which is really nice. Not only for offering a range of products, for me as the brand ambassador to be able to talk about all these wonderful different types of wood, it makes my job so much more interesting.
Absolutely. So I'll do. So we'll have you talk a little bit, and then I'll kind of circle back on the translation and stuff.
All right.
And go back and forth.
No problem.
那我们刚刚就是说，因为我们刚才讨论这支单桶，然后这支单桶算是它老版本了，但是我们就说，因为它的那个酒体就是它酒液就是非常的清澈干净啊，所以我觉得就是能够真正的去体验到那个橡木桶的那些香气更明显的去品尝到，所以如果是有机会买到像说汤马丁的单桶的雪莉桶啊，或是波本桶啊等等的这种单桶原酒，我都非常推荐。对，然后他刚刚也就是认同我说的，就是说他觉得说，因为就是他们的酒厂的这些威士忌呢，都是非常的干净，非常的柔顺，然后好喝。然后呢，所以就是跟任何的橡木桶，就是陈年之后这样子的这个风味显示出来的风味都会非常的明显好喝。Alright. Put the little banner up there. 好，那大家我们基本上我们要开始了。那大家如果这边有什么问题的话，也可以就是旁边就是留言给我们，然后我们尽量就是有时间的时候就都会回答。然后呢，大家也可以分享一下说大家在喝一些什么威士忌呢？希望是塔马丁吗？We hope everybody's drinking a little Tomatin. So so I guess we'll start with the 14.
Yeah.
And then if you want to talk a little bit about the 30-year later and your single cask later, then we can also do that in a little bit.
That sounds good.
We'll
I
just kind of just have it poking out like a little bit, like this.
Just joined us a little bit. Quite right. Quite right. Yeah. So yeah, we can absolutely start by talking about the 14-year-old. Are we good to go now?
Yep, let's get started. And then, well, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your journey, and then where you're, how you're involved with Tomatin and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Scott Adamson, and I'm now the global brand ambassador at Tomatin. I originally started at the company back in 2012. So my
I'm just gonna interject every now and then while you talk. So just try to don't mind me like just kind of looping in just every now and then.
So my background is that I studied Scottish history at university.
苏格兰历史，他的本科是苏格兰历史。Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, and so I originally started working at Tomatin to research the distillery's history. And that then led into a role in the sales department. So I started looking after our sales to Western Europe. I was the regional sales manager. And Tomatin is a company that is such that, you don't just do the job that your title says, you do a mix of everything. So as well as doing the commercial role, I would do a lot of tastings and tours and things like that, and loved that. Then in 2017, I took a sales role at White & Mackay, so looking after products like Dalmore and Jura. And then in 2018, I moved back to Tomatin in this new role as a global brand ambassador. And similarly to the past, it's not just the role itself. So I do all the travel and the tastings and things, but when I'm at the distillery, I work with our master distiller in the sort of cask selection and blending part of the business as well. So history, commercials, products, everything. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask them this evening.
Okay, let me catch us up on. 那他刚刚说，就是他大学的时候是学苏格兰的历史，然后他原本接触到酒厂，就是要学这个汤马丁的酒厂的历史，然后去学习这酒厂的背景啊等等的。So you said when you first got in touch with Tomatin was to learn the history because of your studies, right? Is that correct?
So not even so much to learn the history, but to actually research it for the company. So this was back in 2012, and the company were really looking for more of their history, more information, so that they could start telling the brand story in a new and invigorating way. So my job was to come in. It wasn't part of my research as a student. It was because I had studied Scottish history that I was able to get that role and discover the distillery's history, which was really cool.
所以他原本在2012年就跟酒厂有在酒厂工作，就是他们有请他帮他们研究关于他们酒厂的这些背景跟历史，所以因为他自己就是学历史的，那他这份工作呢，就是之后也是有让他学到很多其他东西，因为小酒厂他说，大家都什么工作都做，不只是研究啊，或是推销啊等等的，然后他其实也有历史方面的经验啊，销售啊，然后何况他现在也是有制酒的一些经验。那他有一段时间他去那个 White & Mackay 就是大摩啊 Jura 那边工作一阵子，但是现在又还是回来了。对，So you're back again. You couldn't get enough.
Couldn't get enough. Yeah. So I've always said that personally I am a massive whiskey geek, and so when the opportunity came up to talk about the brand that I effectively called home to people around the world, and also to work on creating some of the whiskies, it really was one of those opportunities that you can't pass up in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a little bit on you, and now you're in the global ambassador role, and also doing some things with production and making some whiskey and selecting casks and stuff like that. I guess you want to talk a little bit more about that, or do you want to get into the history first and kind of start with the history?
let's talk about the cask selection a little bit later on. Towards the end, we'll be talking about like the cooperage and the warehousing, so it probably fits in quite well there, and I can add a bit to that. But yeah, let's go into the, I guess geography first of all. I think you've got some slides there.
地理，我们来学地理，对 ，OK，yes。那它这边有一份 ，Let me pull up your beautiful slides, by the way.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for the photos, but it was not me. I just put them all together into a document.
Yeah. I have to. Let's see if I can. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, I guess I have to take down this. There you go. 好，那个 Scott 他自己很用心的有准备了一个 PPT 给我们，然后呢，我们今天也会就是看到一些酒厂的照片啊，然后酒厂的介绍啊、历史啊等等的，所以我非常期待。那有些朋友如果这个时间没有办法就是看完啊，或者假如说要照顾小孩子啊等等的话呢，那大家可以就是之后可以看我们的回播。那这一份采访也会在我们的台中威士忌同好会的那个粉丝页面上面，对。那到时候可以看回播哦。对，那同时也要提醒大家说，如果大家喜欢我们今天这次的节目，也就是希望可以帮我们点个赞，在我们的粉丝页面点赞 ，please，thank you. I'm just asking people to like our fan page on Taiwan Whiskey Society, and people can come back and look at this at the replay. Yeah. All right, so let's look at this, huh? It's So that's a postcard there.
Yeah. I think the first thing to say is absolutely how beautiful that photo is, and it's this is kind of where Tomatin is. You see the distillery in the foreground there. If you look to the mountains in the background, with the snow-capped mountains, that's the Cairngorm mountain range.
Cairngorm.
Yeah, just near Aviemore, and but the photo from where this is taken, kind of from where we are in this photograph, is almost more important to the Tomatin story because these are the Monolith Mountains, which is a mouthful. So the Gaelic for monolith is grey, so they're the grey mountains, granite mountains. And this is
他刚刚说它叫做 monolith. Monolith is Gaelic, right?
Yeah, Scots Gaelic.
Scotch Gaelic. 然后他说是 monolith， 然后它就是叫做灰色的山丘，应该是灰色的山，对 ，Grey Mountains, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is 15 miles south of Inverness. So if you looked at your map and you followed the main road through Scotland 15 miles south, you would get here to Tomatin. Now, you can tell by looking at this image that if you were to go back 150 years, for example, this is, even today, this is pretty remote. So if you go back 150 years before there's any road or railway, this really is the middle of nowhere. So beautiful heart of the Scottish Highlands. And then in 1897, a man called John McDougall, who was a local merchant, decided to build his distillery here. There are local tales that John was an illicit distiller himself before building the distillery. We don't have any proof of that, which would suggest that he was quite successful. When it comes to illegal distillation, the only proof we ever have is when the distillers get caught. Now, Tomatin as an area, we know it has a really rich history of illicit distillation because of the name itself. So Tomatin in Gaelic, Tom means hill. So if you think of other distilleries, you've got Tom and Tool, you've got Tam Navulin, you've got Tam Dew. The Tam part is hill. What's unique about Tomatin is the Atin part. And Atin means of the juniper bush. So drinks enthusiasts will know juniper for gin, of course. But the bush itself was loved by illicit distillers because when you light it on fire, when it's dry, of course, it creates an almost invisible smoke. So that was ideal for illicit distillers because it meant that the lawmen couldn't see where they were. So if you think of this area, lots of whiskey being produced illegally, but no roads or railways at the time for people to catch them. And then in 1897, John McDougall decided to build his distillery here, and I'll tell you about that.
Yeah, and then you said the fuel source they used was that particular juniper.
Yeah, so today when we think of juniper, we think of the berry because that's a botanical that's used in the production of gin. But the wood that the berry actually grows on, when it's dried, so when it's cut down and left to dry, the smoke is almost invisible. So it's ideal for heating stills because if you were a tax officer, the only way you had to find a still was to look for the smoke and then follow the smoke. But of course, if you can't see the smoke, you can't find the still. And that's why we've got this incredible rich folklore of illegal distillation in this area, but very little written evidence because nobody was getting caught.
Yeah. 那 Tomatin 这个酒厂呢，就是在我们的苏格兰这个高地，然后呢那边就是当然就是很多私酿啊，然后很多人在这边违法的蒸馏啊、制酒啊，对不对？然后呢，那我们看到这个图片，就是也看到说有没有这片山啊，然后我们下面可以看到说这边就是塔马丁的酒厂。And you said the founder was John. What was the last name again?
McDougall.
John McDougall.
Yeah.
那 John McDougall 就是说，据说就是在这个地方，就是开始蒸馏的。And so he was supposedly the first illicit kind of, well, I guess the supposed illicit distiller that started here in the area, right? But it wasn't really registered as Tomatin then yet, was it?
No. So back before 1897, so again, like I say, this is all folklore. There's no real written evidence of it. It was believed that John was an illicit distiller, but he was by no means the only one. You know, there's an old building on Tomatin that goes back to the 1700s, and it's believed that there was a still in there. So it's a long history of illegal distillation that he's part of. But then in 1897, and I'll explain why he decided to go legitimate in a minute. But in 1897, he started to look for investors to help him build his distillery.
1897, right?
Yeah.
McDougall is MacDougal.
Double L at the end, but yeah, other than that, perfect.
There you go. I'm just leaving some notes here on the thread here as well. John McDougall 是 distilled 1897。那 John 约翰 McDougall 就是因为他们其实不知道说这些都是没有办法去证明的一些历史，那所以就是一些 rumor 嘛，对，那所以John McDougall 就是据说就是第一个人在这边建厂啊，开始蒸馏啊，然后他是在1897年的时候开始蒸馏。那 and you said the Aten part was the juniper, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Aten is specifically translated from Aten is juniper juniper plant or the juniper wood or
juniper bush.
Juniper bush.
Yeah.
Okay. 那他说很特别，就是说，那 Tom 这就是在那个盖尔语嘛，就是像说一个 hill 啊、山丘啊这样子。那 Aten 呢？那我们也可以看到，他刚刚有说，我们可以看到说，像其他品牌有Tomatin 啊，然后其他的有 TOM 这个制的一个酒厂嘛。那它就是在山丘，就是在山边。那 Aten 这一块呢，就是他们的杜松子的这个植物的这个名字。那很有趣的事情就是说，当初这些私酿嘛，因为这种地方有没有太就是就是太远？那如果是那些茶税官啊，那些人要找这些私酿的人，他们一般都会去找说看哪里有出烟啊，那如果有出烟的话，就知道说有这附近或许有人在这边蒸馏。那他们就是用那个杜松子的植物去烧。那如果他说如果这种杜松子的这种植物这种木去让它晒干之后呢，然后再去烧它，去用它当火源去做蒸馏的这个工作的话呢，它几乎是没有烟的。 对，那所以他们就是会用这样子的东西去烧火，那这样子就比较不会被那些茶税官发现，所以我觉得还蛮聪明，真的是很妙的一个故事。Such an interesting story. I never knew, so
Yeah.
I guess one of these days I have to get like some juniper,
Yeah.
butch wood and burn it myself and see really how smokeless it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, give it a go. But yeah, so John, he decides in 1897 to build his distillery. Now we can see from this image how the area would have been a total haven for illegal production. It was so inaccessible. But then if you move to the next slide there, Alex, you'll understand immediately why he decides to build his distillery.
All right, that's great. Because you said you're a nerd. I'm kind of a nerd as well. So
Yeah.
so making I want to write down these notes to share with our friends here that are watching and also just for my own notes as well.
So in 1897, John decides to build his distillery, and the reason is that for the first time, Inverness will be connected directly to the heart of Scotland by the railway line. So John was quite a savvy businessman, and he decided that rather than producing whiskey illegally for his friends and family, he's going to take advantage of the railway and the market that it brings and build his distillery. So 1897, the railway line passes Tomatin, and the distillery is built to capitalize on that. And at the time, we became the first distillery in the Highlands to be built inland. If you look at all of our neighbouring distilleries, so things like Old Pulteney, Glenmorangie, Dalmore, Highland Park, they're all built on the coastline. And that takes advantage of the seas for transporting casks to the market. But in 1897, we were able to use the railway line as a Highland distillery.
I'm curious, is this railway line still operational?
Yeah, it's the main Highland. It's the main route from Inverness down to Perth, Edinburgh, Glasgow. It's 4 or 5 trains a day on that route.
Really? Okay, so it stops right there. So is this within walking distance to the distillery if you got on the train?
When I'm sitting in my office, if I threw a stone out the window, it would probably go over the railway line. It's right next door. Right.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. In fact, up until the 1960s, there was a siding that went right into the courtyard of the distillery.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Loaded there and then out to the main line.
But that's not operational anymore.
No. So in the 1960s, a lot of the regional stops were shut down, and at the same time, there was huge advancements on the road network. So now most of our casks are moved by the road rather than rail.
所以我们现在看这个照片呢，就是他们那个火车的这个轨道。那为什么是1897年就是建厂呢？因为他那时候这个约翰 John McDougall 就觉得就是看到说火车要来了，然后呢就想要把握这个商机，然后呢因为他就觉得说那现在有火车，那这样代表说我就可以运输就更简单，不管是运输大麦啊，或是运输威士忌啊等等啊，那他刚刚也有说，就是蛮有趣的，就是说像其他的酒厂啊，很多都是在海边呐，像福特尼啊等等啊，都是比较靠近海边，因为他们也会考量到说运输这个问题嘛，那所以就是要靠近海边才能够让他们的酒能够运输出去。那汤马丁也算是一个比较早期是建厂在不是那么靠近海边的一个酒厂，那所以我觉得这个也就是因为有这个1897年有这个火车线，就是拉到酒厂那附近。那我刚刚问他说，酒厂的这个跟离这个火车线到底是距离是多少？他说他可以直接用石头扔就可以扔到的，可以碰到的。所以然后他说他原本呢还有一个轨道是直接通到唐马丁酒厂里面这样子。但是现在因为他们当然就是之后就是路况就变得比较好啊，然后所以他们现在当然都是不是用火车，都是用就是直接用 货车啊、卡车啊等等的。Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So I saw you put the bottle up there, and I've got a glass myself. Let's briefly talk about the 14-year-old before we move on, because I don't think mine's going to last too long. So the Tomatin 14-year-old that we're drinking now is it's a beautiful whiskey. You know, I'm very frequently asked what my favorite whiskey in the Tomatin range is, and you know, for a long time I would hum and haw and try and avoid the question, be very classic British political about it, and not give a straight answer. But
not give a straight answer to what again?
Sorry?
Not give a straight answer to what?
So if I was asked, you know, what's your favorite in the range?
Okay.
I was trying to do the I love them all sort of thing.
Yeah,
but honestly,
like they're my children.
Yeah. You know that you've spoken to a brand ambassador before, right? So
we all have a favorite child.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it's the 14-year-old for a couple of reasons. One is a whiskey to drink. You know, the quality of the liquid is fantastic. There's so much going on, so much at play. But also from the point of view as someone that talks about the whiskey for a living, this is a whiskey that I feel you can tell so much of the Tomatin story through one product. You know. So let's do that first. Let's describe the whiskey. So
all right, I'll pause right there for a second. Then 他就说他自己个人喜欢的是汤马丁，他自己个人最喜欢的这个酒款，在汤马丁的酒厂里面的酒款就是14年，因为他觉得说，其实这个酒这一款酒就是很代表酒厂的一些这个精神。那但是他也当然是很喜欢其他的那些酒款，但是他刚刚有就是说有时候他也不喜欢说他哪个是他的最喜欢的，因为就好像自己的孩子不能说哪一个酒是他比较喜欢的酒款。然后现在要跟我们分享一些为什么这款酒呢是有代表那个汤马丁酒厂的这个精神。来 ，OK, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. So we talked a little bit about the new make spirit just before we started talking about the story, and Tomatin over the years developed this style of spirit that is a very fruity but mellow spirit, and we actually call that spirit the softer side of the Highlands.
Yeah.
The reason we did that was that in the post-war years, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Tomatin grew to become the biggest distillery in Scotland. You know, by 1974, we had 23 stills producing 12.5 million litres a year. Massive site.
Yeah.
And it needed to be a light, elegant whiskey, or spirit, should I say, because the vast majority of it was being sold to the blended whiskey industry. So it had to be able to provide a base for various different styles or profiles. Moving into the modern era, though, and Tomatin as a single malt brand, one thing I'll say is we were bottling single malt since 1953. We were one of the first single malt brands as well. But we've really
就开始包单一麦芽威士忌的单一麦芽威士忌。
Yeah. So it's only really in the last 20 years or so that the single malt has become the main part of the business. And we've used that fruity base to create a range that's got a huge variety to it. You know, the spirit is so versatile. You can put it into any number of different casks and create a wonderful whiskey. So there is something for everyone. And on the 14-year-old, this is where we explore port casks. So what we'll do is we will mature for the first 12 years in refill American oak. And that refill American oak...
First, 他说前面12年是就是入算是二次 refill, is it refill American oak, right?
Yeah, for the first 12 years. Yeah.
就是2、3次 is it like a second fill, third fill, or a range of second fill?
A bit of second and a bit of third. Mostly second, but a little bit of third going in there as well.
那他们前面14年是前面12年都是用美国白橡木的这个橡木桶，就是先陈年，那都是大概平均大概都是2或是2次或者第三次的这个入桶的这个橡木桶，然后呢先陈年12年，对。
Yeah. So I think you know, it's quite important to touch on that, because when we're talking about casks, I think everyone has this idea that everything has to be first fill to get a quality spirit. But and in fact, if we were to bottle that spirit at 12 years old, it's going to be very, very light in color, very little cask influence, quite spirit forward. So it's not going to be a great bottle of whiskey in itself, but what it gives us is the perfect base for the 14-year-old. What we're looking for at that 12-year-old in refill is just a mellowing of the house style. We're looking for a bit more of the rounded fruits, cut away some of the sharpness, and just give us the base that we're going to use to put the 14-year-old onto. So you can almost look at that spirit as your canvas, and then the 14-year-old as your paint. Sorry, the port cask as your paint.
So the port is that last 2 years is the port, right?
A minimum of 2 years, yeah. So we'll move that 12-year-old spirit into port casks. Now, this is where things get really interesting because, as you'll know, more and more port matured whiskies are becoming available now. Over the last 5-10 years, port as a style of maturation has really opened up. But what we're doing at Tomatin is a little bit different. The vast majority of producers are using ruby port casks. And ruby port casks are lovely. It's a young style of port that gives you a lot of strawberries and raspberry flavors. We use it in some of our experiments at the moment as well. But what our master distiller came to understand with this is that we've already got a light fruity spirit. The last thing that we need is more light fruits. So what we've done here is we've sourced tawny port casks. Tawny is an older style of port. It's a well-matured port. And what will happen...
That actually doesn't say on here, huh? It just says port cask. It doesn't say tawny port.
It says port on the bottle, but on the carton there, tawny port casks.
Oh, okay, on the box, but not on the bottle, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, so that information is there, but it's as you can see, the label on the bottle is quite small to fit it all in. But yeah, so we're using tawny port casks now. Tawny is a much older style of port, and we'll get onto it in a while why it's so important to us. But we work directly with the Symington wine estates. And the Symingtons are the producers of Graham's and Dow's ports. So exceptional quality port, and the casks have held that liquid for over 50 years.
Oh, how do you spell Symingtons? Symingtons.
Symington. Yeah, Symington.
Sym.
Yeah. ing.
Symington.
Ton. Yeah. So we're buying our casks from them. We only get about 60 of them a year, tawny casks, and they've held the tawny port they've been in use for about 50 years before we get the casks. So when we put our spirit into it for that last 2 years, we're drinking in 50 years of liquid history there. Now that liquid is not that strawberry, raspberry, fruity flavor that you would get from a ruby. It's much nuttier. There's huge amounts of like honeycomb and dark chocolate. There's a little bit of like cherry and bramble, like forest fruits. But really what it's doing is it's adding so much complexity and depth to this whiskey. So you get this wonderful mouthfeel there. And it's a whiskey for me that is very approachable. It's a very good drinking whiskey. But you can also nose and taste it, and you can be nosing it for half an hour or so, writing notes before you even take a drink of it. But also, if you're just sitting at home casually looking for a whiskey to drink, it performs that role exceptionally well as well.
所以他刚刚就是在解释说，这款酒的一些故事。那刚刚我们有知道说，这款14年，它就是12年是先成年美国项目，然后最后2年到3年。以上2、3、4年吧，都是用波特桶。那波特桶他们就是用这个 Symington 这个集团的这个 Tawny Port。那 Port 它当然也有分，像 Ruby Port 跟 Tawny Port。Tawny Port 一般是会比较沉一点的一个调型，然后呢，那 Ruby Port 会比较清澈干净，清水果这样子。那他们就觉得说，因为他们的酒体已经是非常的清澈干净水果这样子的调，他们想要用一些比较沉的一些风味，那当然就是用 Tawny Port。那大家如果有这款酒的话呢，就可以看到说 他们的14年的那个外盒的包装上面就有写 Tawny Port Cask。那但是刚刚他也有提到说关于这个汤马丁历史的，那曾经汤马丁其实也是全苏格兰其中一个最大的酒厂，相信不相信？因为他1974年的那时候呢，1974年其实那时候就开始渐渐的苏格兰威士忌就慢慢的有点落后，就是有开始慢慢的没有人在喝那么多威士忌，那他们刚好就在那个时候增加他们的蒸馏器。I'm going back and talking about the stills, the increase, right? So it was up to like 12 million liters of production capacity, right? Which is
that's right.
那时候呢，因为有23个蒸馏器呢，它原本是从2个，然后一直装。It started with 2, obviously, and then it just kept on growing up until 23.
Right.
And now you guys are back at 6?
No, so we're back at 12, but we use 10. And when we get to the still house, I'll tell you a little bit about that system as well.
And then 他们那时候就大概就是最多就到23，然后他们的这个每年的产量是12.5 million liters， 对 ，12.5 million liters。那其实是 that's like I think that's how much is the you know how much the new Macallan distillery is producing?
I know that Glenfiddich are up at more than 20 nowadays,
Okay.
Like we no longer hold the record. But for us to be able to do it, for us to be producing that much whiskey effectively nearly 50 years ago is pretty outrageous,
Yeah. 那时候他们那时候当然就是他们能够制造那么多酒，他们会想要制造那么久，其实他们的主要的目标就是要蒸馏基酒拿来就是给人家拿去用来调和威士忌的嘛，因为你的产量那么大，其实你卖不了那么多单一麦芽威士忌啊。那他们那时候主要的调呢，跟今天也是一样，所以这个也是代表他们的这个酒厂的风格，就是历史来说，就是说他们那时候呢，就是要制造出一个非常清澈干净的一个威士忌，所以他们才可以卖给那些要买他们的酒去做调和威士忌，或是他们自己要做调和威士忌，所以就是要有一个比较水果啊、干净啊等等这样子才能够才比较好拿来用去做调和威士忌这样子的。Go ahead. So then,
perfect. So just
everything.
Yeah, just on the 14-year-old before we move on back into the story, one thing that I always say about this is that I find it to be a very autumnal whiskey. In the summer here, in our back garden, we grow quite a lot of fruits and berries and things, and we'll pick them and then we'll make jam out of it. That sweet preserve, and the 14-year-old has a lot of those flavors for me. So I always find it to be very fitting at this time of year, and I think with you just having the Mid-Autumn Festival over there, it's a perfect whiskey kind of for that time of year and to celebrate all those flavors. But so we've got this wonderful whiskey to drink now. But
到时候我们这边是中秋节，所以Happy Mid-Autumn Festival, everybody. 中秋节快乐。
So as you can see, the distillery is built in 1897, but one of the big problems that the area presented, that the region that we're built in presented, was that it was the middle of nowhere and there was no real population base at the time. So the biggest problem we had is we had this wonderful location with a great water source, there was a supply of peat, and there was the railway line, but we didn't really have a workforce. So if you move on to the next slide there, Alex, you'll see the way we got around that issue.
Yeah, there's almost kind of like a slight, almost kind of like a violet or purplish hue to it, with port you get,
Yeah, it is. I remember the first time we bottled it, there was you would think that we had poured rosé wine into the bottle, which we didn't, but it did look like that. So yeah, like I say, the biggest problem we had was there was no population to run the distillery.
Mm-hmm.
So when the distillery was built in 1897, we started building some workers' housing, And the three houses, the first three houses are the buildings you see there.
是他们的这个员工宿舍 ，Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that remained a problem, just because the distillery grew didn't mean that we were any closer to any towns or anything like that. So throughout our history, as the distillery expanded, so did the number of housing, to the point that today we have 30 houses on site. So when you drive into the distillery, there are 30 cottages. Now, this is, to the best of my knowledge, totally unique today. Historically, a lot of distilleries would build houses, but as they've been taken over by other companies, the property's been sold. But at Tomatin, we're the last distillery in Scotland to provide housing to the majority of our workforce. So the majority of our staff live in housing at the distillery, which is a really cool thing. It means that they stay with the distillery for a long time. It means that their sons and daughters grow up to work in the distillery as well. So there's this huge feeling of pride and passion at the worker level that really runs quite deep.
Do you live here as well then?
I used to. So I lived at Tomatin between 2013 and 17. I lived in number 8 distillery cottages. I now live a little bit further north where my family is from, but no, I did live on site for 4 years, and it was an incredible experience.
Wow. And then, so is there like a how remote is it? Is there like a grocery store that you could walk to, or you have to drive to, or?
Yeah, there's a little I guess what you would call a convenience store. There's now a cafe. Since we left, they opened a cafe. But yeah, so that's really nice. But other than that, you have to drive up to Inverness for your weekly shopping.
Gotcha. So 他们说这个是员工宿舍 and these houses are owned by the distillery then, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So they're owned by the distillery and given to the workers. And yeah, it's a great thing. It means that, like I say, you end up with generations of the same family working at Tomatin. So a good example is one of our warehouse workers, Colin. So Colin's been working at the distillery, I think, for over a decade. But his father was the distillery manager, and he worked with us for 53 years.
Wow.
And his father was the distillery manager and worked with us for 50 years as well. So that takes us right back to 1897. You've got 115 years of history in one family. And it is always quite cool that you find little notes or little bits of graffiti or things like that were left by current workers' grandfathers and things like that at the distillery. Yeah. It's really, really nice part of the story.
So do all employees get to live there like rent free, or do they have to pay rent?
So it's a strange thing. It used to be free, but now I think it's around about £20 to £25 a month. It's a tiny amount. Yeah, and the reason
租金25英镑住在这里，哇，它原本是免费，然后现在是25英镑。Yeah.
It's £25. It's nothing, you can't even buy a tent for that amount of money, but it's a nominal sort of charge, just so we can say it's an asset. But yeah, so that's really cool that we still have that on site. We're the only distillery to have that. And it just kind of shows our commitment to the place. I think another important part of that story is that in the Northern Highlands, it's very rare for the distillery's offices to still be at the distillery. If you think of a lot of the other brands around the Highlands, they're part of their head offices in Glasgow or Edinburgh, or even down in London. We still make all the decisions. Just so you see the three houses there, across the road is our main office building. And that's where our managing director is based. It's where our sales and marketing team are based. It's where I'm based. So it's a real commitment to the place. And a lot of the decision making is informed by where we're from, which is quite cool.
Yeah. 对啊，实在是，所以是这种他就刚刚之前有说他们的一些员工啊，然后这样蒸馏师啊，就是一代接一代，就是住在这里。那这样子。You said one family has been there for like 150 years, or is it 100 years? 150?
Yeah, over 100 years. That's just one example. There's various examples of the same thing going on.
对，有些家族已经就是住在那边超过100多年了，就是爸爸在那边工作啊，然后儿子就是跟着在那边工作啊，然后他就是一直住在酒厂这边。其实这个 他说这也是他们全苏格兰也是唯一他们有这样子的这种员工宿舍给员工住，对，然后1个月才25英镑，真的太佛了。然后他就说他们何况是他们自己的那个像办公室啊，跟他们的算是总部门啊，也在酒厂这边。那他说有些酒厂就是当然是会分到或许城市啊什么其他地方，但是他就说他们的主要的办公室就是在这些宿舍的前面这样子。You said your main like kind of office operations are also on site as well, right? As opposed to like relocated to the city or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a funny thing. It's a small part of the story, but I do feel that it's important because more often nowadays the conversation about terroir is being brought up.
Yeah.
And it's been applied a lot to barley, but I think what people often miss out, a big part of terroir is the kind of connection that people have with a place and people have with a product. So for us to be making the decisions about what we bottle, how we blend, I think it makes Tomatin a very, very good representation of the Highlands and of the distillery itself.
Yeah. 他刚刚有提到说这个风土这一块，因为现在很多威士忌都在讲风土这一块，然后所以他觉得说，像说何况他们自己的员工啊，跟这些制酒的这些人啊，其实也是跟他们的这个酒厂的调跟他们的风土也是有关系的啦，对啊，这也算是一个蛮浪漫的一个想法。
So should we talk a little bit about how we make this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So here's the water source here.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always said, and I think it's a very accurate description, whiskey production has a lot of steps to it. There is malting, mashing, milling, fermentation, all these steps. But I think you can actually break it down into two elements. And what you've got, first of all, is the science of distillation, the science of spirit production. And then on the second side, you've got the art of maturation. So the first thing that we'll talk about and we'll cover is very much how we create our new make spirits. So as distillers, we want the new make spirit to run off the stills to be the exact same today as it has been for the last 10, 20, 30 years. This spirit, without that spirit, you don't have the heart of Tomatin single malt. So the first part of the process that we're going to talk about is how we get to that stage. And the very first part, of course, is our ingredients. And water is, of course, probably the most important when you look at volumes used.
Yeah. 他刚刚就说，他们现在他觉得我们现在看这图片就是水源嘛，关于水源，他说水也是一个非常重要的，因为他们每个酒厂都是要大量的用很多水嘛，不管是是他们的 mashing 啊，或是蒸馏啊，或是他们这个冷凝啊等等，都是需要用大量的水，然后何况是很发酵啊等等啊。那他就说他们也是这个酒厂也是一直是很坚持维持他们这个酒厂的一个这个调这个风格跟这种他们的这个味道。那他们的目标当然就是不管是20年啊30年啊或是更久啊，那就是让他们的酒厂的酒一直都是一样一个一致的一个表现。Yeah, go ahead. And so water source, natural water source.
Natural water source, yeah. With Tomatin being inland, we're one of the highest distilleries in Scotland. We're 315 meters above sea level. So that means that the surface water, the river water, is wonderfully soft. And what it also means is that further upstream than us, there's no farming. So there's no kind of runoff from the fields. So we have this wonderful soft water that has no contamination in it. And it's called the Altna Frith. It's a small little stream that runs into the River Fintorn. I'm going to send you it as a private message so that you've got the spelling there. But it's called the Altna Frith, which in Gaelic is
Freeburn.
Freeburn, yeah. So it's this wonderfully soft water source that we'll use
to be free kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Well, it's even more complex than that. So it's not like free as in the Braveheart freedom sort of thing. Free is also another Gaelic word which means deer forest. So it's so much more complicated than that. But yeah, so
also deer forest. It also means deer forest.
Yeah, so further upstream, it's a big. There's a lot of hunting up there, so a lot of deer hunting. But the water comes to us. It's perfect for whiskey making. We don't need to do anything to it for the production water, other than heat it up and cool it down as required. It's also plentiful. You know, we very rarely suffer from drought where we are, and in the months that we do, we can turn on the pumps and pump up water from the River Findhorn. That's not actually in the liquid. That's used for steam, for heating the distillery, rather than. So all of the liquid that's used in the whiskey is from this Altnefrith burn. And if you move on to the next slide there, Alex, we'll get onto the barley conversation.
这是他们的水流 Altnefrith
Yeah.
Altnefrith 然后他刚刚说他们的这个什么海平面也算是蛮高的，也算是全苏格兰比较偏高的一个酒厂。他说大概300 meters, right, above sea level?
Yeah, a little bit above that, 315. So
315. And you said how does that affect the water? The water, you said it's softer because of the sea level?
Well, no. So the reason that it's soft is because it's surface water. So surface water is rainfall that has landed, has collected, and has traveled overland to the distillery. So with us, that water is with us within a day or two of the rainfall. So rainfall is soft water, and it's soft because it gets to us without picking up any mineral content. If we had a borehole, if we had a groundwater source, a borehole, which has spent thousands of years in the rock picking up minerals, that would be a hard water source.
Yeah.
The reason that the elevation is important is because it's almost as high as it goes, you know, and anything above us is mountains. So there's no farmland. And what that means is that there's no runoff of like pesticides or anything from the farm into the water. So that's where the elevation becomes important to us.
Gotcha. 他刚刚就是说他们这个酒厂的位置啊，就是他们的我刚刚 translate 了一下这个海平面，就是大概300多，对，这个地表面上的水就是没有经过，所以他们的水算是比较 soft。那如果当然是有经过已经就是山啊，然后那些矿物啊，那水会比较硬性一点。对，那它同时也是说，因为他们也算是在一个偏比较高的一个区块，那也没有那么多的，也基本上就是没有任何的农场啊，或是这些等等的这些farm 啊，那他们也不会有任何的这些像这些杀虫的这些 pesticides 啊，这种比较不天然的东西去污染到这个水，所以他说这个水源就是非常的天然，非常的纯。那因为它也是因为位置，他们这个雨一下来的话，他说大概2-3天就会流到他们的酒厂那边，所以算是一个还蛮天然的一个水源啊。然后他觉得说这个是他们的一个酒厂的一个很不错的一个优点。Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. So if we move on to the next slide there, you'll see the first picture that we've shown of the distillery close up.
Yeah, there we go.
So this is the distillery, and that big black building in the middle there is our malt bins. So historically at Tomatin, we malted all our own barley on site. But then as the distillery expanded, it got to the point where it just was not possible to malt all the barley we needed. It would have taken hundreds of men and a huge amount of space. So in the 1960s, we stopped malting and we started buying in. Now, the cool thing about that is that we've been buying in our malt for a lot longer than most distilleries. And that means that we have very, very long contracts in place, which means that we're able to guarantee that every grain of barley that comes to Tomatin Distillery is grown in Scotland. And a huge amount of distilleries nowadays have to buy their barley from England, from Denmark, from Russia, purely because there's not enough in Scotland of malting quality. Now, that doesn't mean that their whiskey is inferior. It does not mean that at all, and I'm not suggesting that. What it means, though, is that we can trace all of our barley back to fields in Scotland. You know, every batch has a number assigned to it that we can go all the way back through the process to the field. We have full control over the specifications of the barley. Mm-hmm. So at Tomatin, we're using unpeated laureate barley. But actually, what's quite cool about Tomatin is because of the size of the distillery, we're able to do a lot of trials and things. So over the last couple of months, we've been running Diablo barley through the distillery to find out a little bit about its processability, the spirit, is there's going to be any difference. It's been performing very well for us right now, and it looks to be kind of, you know, the barley breeders go through periods. So barley develops and you move on to a different strain, and Diablo looks to be kind of the future. But right now we're using Diablo for trial, but most of our production is coming from Laureate, and it's unpeated.
OK， 那刚刚他就是在讨论说when the you guys did your own malting until the 1960s?
Yeah. And even in the 1960s, we were supplementing that with buying in, but the 1960s was when we stopped on site.
那他们现在当然就是跟很多酒厂一样，都是有去买，然后买他们的大麦需要的用的大麦，然后但是他们1960年代之前呢，他们的所有的这些大麦都是自己在酒厂这边发芽，然后去处理的。那因为他们的这个现在也是自产的这些量啊，然后当然就是外包别人去处理他们的大麦，当然也是会比较有效率啊，因为真的是如果是要自己发芽大麦，大家可以看一些那种传统的大麦的处理的方式，其实是非常非常费力，然后费人工时间等等的，所以他们就是最后还是请别人帮他们处理大麦这一块。那他们的大麦他说是就是无泥煤啊，那他们传统来说都是用一个 laureate 的一个大麦来去制造他们的酒，但是他们现在最近也是有去做实验，有另外一款大麦是叫 Diablo。那他同时说，因为他们也已经跟这些发麦厂跟这些制麦厂已经合作很久了，所以他们所有的大麦呢而且他们也没有像说那种特大的品牌需要那么多的大麦，所以他们可以控制好他们的这个大麦的来源。所以他们所有100%的这个大麦呢，都是来自于苏格兰本地的大麦，所以也是有跟他们的酒厂的这个品质啊、风土啊等等有一个关系的。Go ahead, yeah. And is there a reason why you guys your distillery is black?
No reason really. Actually, that building there is pretty much the only black building on site. That's built with like a corrugated material. Everything else is white. You'll see in the background there are some warehouses that have gone that grey color because of the kind of evaporation. But no, most of the distillery is white, and hopefully on other images that we've got, you'll see that as we go through. But yeah, so that black building there, that is the malt storage room. So you go in there and there are massive red steel containers that are filled with 50 tons of barley for malting.
那黑色这个建筑就是他们的这个大麦的库存室，所以里面大概就是有很多的大麦就是存在里面的。
Yeah, perfect. So if we go into the next image there.
You know what? I do have another question because I looked over some information on the distillery, and it's actually kind of funny. I did read something about the malt specifications, is actually a low 2 ppm peat. Is that is that
No,
no, that's true?
It's 0 ppm, and I don't know where the 2 ppm thing comes from. I think it's because for 1 week of the year, or a couple of weeks at the end of the year, we do run lightly peated barley, but that's to like 15, 20 ppm. So I think someone's taken an average of our annual production, but no, in the barley that we use for Tomatin, there's no peated barley used in that at all.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I gotta write to scotchwhiskey.com and tell them they got it wrong.
Yeah. I'll let you be the one to do that. I think they're out of business now anyway, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Well, so so we're going to also talk about fermentation a little bit later too.
Yeah. Big time. It's a very important part of the story. But if we go on to the next image, I think you'll find us in our mash house.
And the reason why I asked about the black buildings and whatnot, and so you probably know that any and every distillery, because of the alcohol and whatnot in the air, there is a black mold that grows all over the place. Like specifically like they've had a lot of like environmental issues in like Kentucky, where there's really like millions of casks. There's more casks than people in Kentucky, and
Scotland. Same story in Scotland.
Yeah. But then I feel like I don't know if I guess Scotland is more spread out, right? But like in Kentucky, you may be living pretty close to the distillery, and there's black moss like all over town, and it's become like some kind of a environmental issue. But then also, so a lot of distilleries will paint their used to be, I guess, historically, because of distilleries, and like that was a way for the excisemen to find out, looks like there's kind of mold growing around here.
Yeah,
there's somebody's distilling around here, so people would paint things black to kind of cover up those.
That makes sense. I mean, like at Tomatin, it doesn't really affect the building so much, but there are some trees that there's a forest around Tomatin, and the first few trees are black on the trunk. And do you know what? It makes for some absolutely incredible photos at this time of year, because you've got like the white distillery building with a black tree and bright orange leaves on it. It's absolutely stunning.
Nice. Wow.
I think the guidance that we've been given from the SWA is that this moss is allegedly a result of distillation. You'll never find a distillery that fully owns up to it, because then they'd have to spend thousands of pounds painting everyone's house every year. So allegedly, Alex, allegedly.
Allegedly, that's right. Yeah. 我刚才讨论到说，就是酒厂附近都会出现一种黑青嘛，或者是那种黑 moss。Black moss， 然后呢，我就在讨论到说，之前的那个 Kentucky 酒厂，他们那边也很多这样子的问题啦。然后那他们有些酒厂就是会故意把酒厂的建筑就是漆黑去隐藏那些青苔等等的。但是这个就是因为酒厂附近都会有这种东西出生。因为他们就是爱吃空气中的那些酒精，对，它也是一种霉菌这样子的。Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So this next slide is where I'm at right now.
That's right.
I'm right here.
You're right there with us. Yeah. Fantastic. So this is our tun room. This is where fermentation happens, and we've missed a step, which is the mashing process, where we mix our barley with water. And we're going to mix 9 tons of barley with about 60,000 litres of water to give us 45,000 litres of wort for fermentation. Now, when you're walking around Tomatin, you will notice that it's an incredibly industrial-looking complex. The vast majority of the equipment that we use was built in the 1960s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And it was designed at that time to be the most efficient distillery. At that time, it was all about producing as much liquid as quickly as possible. But now our approach is very different. So if we take our mash tun, for example, the mashing process theoretically can be complete in about 3.5 to 4 hours. But we slow it down and we take 6 hours to do that, to give us a slightly clearer wort. I think where it becomes very important is when we get to fermentation and distillation. And we're in our tun room here, where we have 12 washbacks. They can each hold 45,000 litres of wort. And from that, you know, fermentation as a process is finished in 48 hours. What we do at Tomatin is we have two fermentation lengths. We have 53 hours and we have 103 hours. And the reason for that is that we only work from Monday morning to Friday lunchtime. So anything that's mashed on a Monday or a Tuesday will be distilled in the same week. But anything that's mashed on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday has to ferment over the weekend. And unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, yeast does not care that you've gone home for the weekend, and it keeps doing its work. So what we have after the weekend is this long fermentation that's 103 hours. And it's from that liquid that we get this wonderful fruity base point. Now, the wash that's fermented for 53 hours, that's the spirit that will be distilled and we'll use in our blends. The liquid that we use for our single malt has this long 103-hour fermentation. Right at this base level, we've got that late-forming lactic acid bacteria, and that's going to give us this wonderful pineapple banana flavor into the wash right there.
Yeah, and so so all the single malt uses the 103.
Yeah.
But then my question was, I wondered if you guys did like a vatting of the two, and then are there any expressions that does that at all, or?
Well, we've not as yet. We've not as yet. So it's a part of the production process that we're experimenting quite a lot with right now. So just from a production point of view, we have our master distiller, who's a man called Graham Unson. We'll talk about him in a while. But below him, we have our distillery manager, Janice Mayer, who came to us from William Grant and Sons, and she's hugely interested in experimentation. So I foresee the mix of the two being something that we'll do. The 53-hour fermentation gives us a much nuttier, biscuity, maltier flavor. The longer fermentation, it actually gets to the level of, I don't know if you've ever tried anything like a Belgian Saison beer, a goose beer from Belgium, but it's got that sort of intensely tropical fruity flavor to it. So if you mix those together, it could be quite interesting. What we're actually doing right now, as we've come out of our lockdown and our production lockdown, we're running week-long fermentations at the moment. So what would be distilling tomorrow, what will be mashing tomorrow will not be distilled for another week. So we're having week-long fermentation trials at the moment, which are yielding pretty interesting results. So you never know, in a few years' time, we might have a limited edition that explores that long fermentation.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to, because I know you guys also use a louder ton, right?
Yeah, semi-louter ton. Yeah, so we were actually, oddly enough, like I say, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was this strive for efficiency. We were the first Scottish distillery to adopt the louter ton.
Yeah.
So before that, everyone was using the traditional system, but we brought in that rake system and the filtration. So yeah, we were the first distillery to do that. We still use it to this day, and it's brilliant for the style of fermentation that we're going for.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull up a picture of that here. And
because another thing that's cool at Tomatin is effectively now. So that's an interesting point. So that is from our operating mash tun. But like we said earlier on, you know, we used to have a capacity of 12 million litres. Our capacity now is 5 million litres, but we only produce 2 million. So a lot of the equipment that we used to use in the 1970s is no longer in use. And we used to have 2 mash tuns operating. So in our old mash tun, you can actually go inside it and get your photo taken and everything like that. So I believe it's the only mash tun in Scotland that you can actually go inside. So we're a much smaller distillery than we were in the 1970s, with the focus on quality over quantity nowadays. But yeah.
So this is the 让大家看一下他们的这个发酵槽这个semi louder, right? Semi louder. All right, and let me talk a little about the fermentation that you had just mentioned earlier. 那他刚刚说他其实为什么汤姆马丁呢就是那么的水果？那这个也是跟他们的发酵时间其实是有关系的。那我刚刚这边也有就是这边笔记了一下，说 fermentation 呢，关于就是发酵时间，他们一部分是发酵53小时，对，那另外一部分呢，就是他们就是假设说星期五发酵的话呢，他们就直接让它整个周末就是继续发酵，对，那这样子的比较长久的发酵的时间呢，其实就是会让酒体非常的水果，对，因为它的那些发酵的那个酵母产生的那些风味啊等等啊，就是你发酵越久的话，就是越水果啊，越青苹果啊，它就是刚刚有说像香蕉啊、苹果啊，像凤梨啊等等这些东西。对，然后所以何况是他们的这个 mashing 的这个部分，他们 mashing 的部分呢，他们也是用一个比较清澈的这个 wort， 他们的这个麦汁，因为如果是去搅拌比较快，因为我们刚刚看到这个搅拌的这个道具，如果搅拌比较快，就是他们的那个麦汁就是会比较没有那么清澈，然后或许会带着像一些骨壳啊，然后一些那些谷物在里面啊，那所以就没有那么的清澈水果。那如果是比较慢呢，你去搅拌的时候比较慢，它们流出来的那些麦汁啊、谷汁啊，就会比较清澈、比较干净一点。那这样子也是会让酒体同时会比较干净一点呀。So 6-hour mashing, right? So you guys do like a clear wort essentially. Do you guys do kind of processing like or filtering of that wort before you go into fermentation, or it's just
no? So the only filtering that takes place is the filter in the bottom of the mash tun. You know, there's no kind of extracurricular filtration going on or anything that there. The wort will drain from the mash tun into our underback so that we don't have any pressure issues, and then from the underback through a heat exchanger into the fermentation tuns.
Gotcha. Because I know there's some distilleries that they even go as far as to kind of filter and clean up the wort even more, and then they go into the fermentation process.
Yeah. So there's a process called Vorloff that you can do, which basically, you know how as the mash tun is draining, we add more water in. Vorloff, what it does is it takes the wort that you're pulling through the bottom, and it puts that back through the top so that it filters through the grain bed again. So it uses the grain bed as kind of like a secondary filter.
Oh, okay. It's called a Vorloff? Huh.
Yeah, I'll message you that as well so you can see it. And there we go.
So you run water through it 3 times?
Well, yeah, so we'll put the first water in. That's about 30,000 litres at 60. I guess we probably put it in at about 68 degrees Celsius as our strike water to bring it down to 64, 65. And that's what's going to get all the starch out of the barley, or gelatinize the barley and get all the starch moving. The second water, it basically washes any of the sugars that have stuck in. It washes that through, and that's the first 2 waters. Those 2 waters make up our 45,000 litres that go through to fermentation. The third and final water will do the same again. It will pull out any little sugars that are left, but you're also starting to draw a lot of tannin from the barley at that point. So that goes back up into our water tank and forms around about a quarter of the water that we use in the first batch of the next mash.
Okay, so the last filter you'll keep some.
Yeah, exactly. Gotcha. But then we get our fermentation, and after our fermentation, we take the wash through into the distillery, into the still house, I should say. And I think you might have a photo of our still house next.
那刚刚我们讨论就是说糖化，然后就是要冲麦汁的时候，他们就一般都是冲3次。然后我们有讨论到其实有另外一种方式叫做 Vorloff 的这个方法，然后就是再重新把麦汁再重新从上面再冲那些骨壳啊等等，然后就是基本上面算是再过滤一次，让那些麦汁更清澈。那他们也是用3次冲水，那传统都是用3次冲水嘛，就是渐渐的，就是先从比较低温60几度到80、70、80这样子。那最后一个批次呢，他们会把一点水留下来，就是最后冲那些麦汁的时候，会一部分会留下来，然后再放入他们下一批次的第一泡的水，大家这样懂吗？对啊，所以这个他们也是这也是他们要维持一个干净清澈的一个方法。All right,
So,
and these stills.
Yeah, so we're in a
darker in this picture than the ones I've seen before.
You say darker?
Yeah. It's a lot more rustic.
Yeah, much more atmospheric. It's every photographer wants their own kind of approach on it, and I think nowadays we've seen photographers move away from that kind of polished photo to the real nitty gritty of the distillery, which I love as well. But we're in our still house now, and as I mentioned before, we historically had 23 stills, but in 2000 or 2001, 11 of them were removed, leaving us with 12. So we have
蒸馏器到现在12个，对，go on.
So we have 6 wash stills and 6 spirit stills, but we will only use 4 of the spirit stills. Now, I can tell you, so one thing that's pretty unique about Tomatin, if you go to a lot of distilleries, the wash still will be one size and one shape, and then the spirit still will look totally different. At Tomatin, the wash and spirit stills are identical to each other.
Okay.
Which is pretty unique. But I can tell you that looking at this image, we're looking at our wash stills right now. And the reason I'm able to tell you that is you see that little blue piece of rope that goes up the side of the still.
Yeah.
The reason for that is at most distilleries, so what you're doing in your wash still is you're taking your wash from your fermentation vessel that's sitting at around about 8 or 9% ABV, and you're heating it up to around about 90 degrees centigrade to separate the alcohol out. But at that temperature, there's a real risk of boiling the wash rather than separating it. And at most distilleries, you'll find a window in the neck of the still so that the liquid's traveling up there, you can go and turn it down. Well, at Tomatin, we operate below the stills, so we work underneath them. And what that means is that we can't go up and see the little looking glass on the still. So we've got a piece of rope with a wooden knocker on it. You can see it on the third still in. There's that little piece of wood. And periodically, the stillman will come and he'll pull the piece of rope, and the wooden knocker will hit off the neck of the still. So if that's a hollow noise, they know that they're fine, nothing needs to be done. But if it makes a solid sound, they know they have to turn the steam down because...
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah,
because I was going to ask you about the window, for the first still distillation there.
Yeah, so this was the way it was done when all the distilleries were coal-fired. And as Tomatin expanded, we were still coal-fired. We've moved to steam now, of course. But the guys still have to work below the still, and actually going upstairs just to check the window every sort of half hour it's much easier just to ring the knocker. So what will happen is one of our fermentation tons that are still behind you on the screen there, that will fill 3 wash stills. We'll distill that out and we'll get a liquid that's about 20% alcohol, and that will directly fill 2 spirit stills. So it's a balanced system. Historically, we ran an unbalanced system, which meant that as soon as a still was emptied, we would fill it with either low wines or with wash, depending on what still. Now we wait until we have a washback available to fill the 3 stills. Then we will wait till that's all distilled over to fill the 2 stills. So a much more balanced system now. At the spirit still level, we're distilling and we're going to take our cut. Now you'll see that our stills are very tall, very narrow neck, and we've also got this boil chamber. And that's that ball in the neck. And that's going to create a lot of turbulence, a lot of reflux, and that's going to give us that lighter Tomatin spirit. If we never had that ball in the neck, the vapor would travel up and over quite simply, and it would be an oilier spirit, but we're wanting that lovely, light, elegant Tomatin style.
Yeah.
On this second distillation, our 4 shots will run for the first half hour. Then after half an hour, we'll move on to spirit or onto the heart run. And then we will come off spirit about 3 hours later when we get to 65% ABV. So we're coming off spirit at 65%. And that means the aromas, the volatiles that we're collecting are those lighter, fruitier, floral, ethereal notes. There's very little of that heavy oils or phenolic compounds coming off the spirit, off the still there. And then the final...
right?
Sorry?
Didn't you make it 65%?
Yeah, so our new make, the average strength of it is 71%, but we come off spirit at 65%. Yeah.
I'm sorry, 71%
is the average of our new make spirit strength. Yeah,
70-some%. Okay. And it's the significance of the 65% was
that's when we go on to the faints.
Oh, faints. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll collect spirit until it gets to a strength of 65%. But overall, all that liquid that we've collected has the average strength of 71.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got this wonderful new mix spirit coming off the stills that is light, it's fruity, it's mellow. We've very, very quickly ran through a lot of chemistry there because distillation is by no means a simple process, but you can talk for hours and hours about it and still get to the same endpoint, which is this lovely fruity Tomatin new mix spirit. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else worthy of note there. Any kind of
let me actually catch up, and you can think about it for a little bit.
Yeah, perfect.
And actually, I wanted to share this picture here, which you're talking about working below.
Yeah,
this is a good picture here from a different angle.
Yeah, so this is the height that we work at.
对啊，那这是他们这就是不同的角度去看他们这个蒸馏器，对啊，然后他们就说他们有没有就是算是在一个另外一个平台上面这样子，对，那所以有时候他们或许没有看办法在那个上面这边工作啊，那他们就说比较特殊的地方就是说，一般酒厂他们有分一个 wash still， 然后有一份另外一个是 spirit still 嘛，对不对？那 wash still 它就是那些他们的酒汁。就是他们啤酒汁的这个发酵过那些酒汁会先放在他们的 wash still 里面，然后呢，先去做第一次蒸馏。那第一次蒸馏完就会进入他们的这个 spirit still， 再去这个烈酒蒸馏器，就是去做2次蒸馏。那一般的第一次蒸馏器呢，那一次蒸馏他们都会有一个小窗口。因为就像我们在煮牛奶啊，或者假设我们光是在煮面啊，或者煮麦片啊，什么这些都知道说，如果是加热这种东西加热的话，都会起泡。那一般的蒸馏器那种第一次蒸馏器的 wash still 的时候，他们都会放一个小窗口在那边，那所以蒸馏师就可以看到说， 就可以看到说他们是不是那个火啊要做调整啊，因为他们不想要不能够让那些泡泡就是整个这样子煮太多，然后就整个滚过去嘛，对不对？那这样子它那个酒精的部分就坏掉了，就要重新开始。那所以他们就说他们比较特殊的地方，他们的 wash still 跟 spirit still 他们两个其实是都一样的，那他们都没有任何的那些窗口，但是他们有一个这样子的，刚刚有看到那个蓝线 ，we can maybe take a look at this close up here.
Yeah.
This blue string here. Where's
Yeah,
right. Is there here? Is this no? Where's that?
No, so just if you go with your mouse down directly to right beside a little bit more.
There.
That's the wooden ball.
Okay, there it is. Okay.
So that will ring just above the boil chamber. That will ring off the neck of the still.
OK 呀、所以超级特殊的。那因为他们没有他没有那个小窗口，所以他们就是会用他们自己用的一个这样子的一个工具，然后他们就是从下面这边 ，I guess you can actually pull from it from below.
Yeah, if you zoom back in, you go to the right hand side of the still. So go down the still to ground level. Just to the right of your screen there, you can see the blue line. Yep.
There it is. Okay.
That's what they do. They pull. It's very much like a church bell or something, pulling that and waiting for the ring. And based on the sound, if it's a hollow sound, everything's good. If it's a solid sound, wow, quickly run and turn the still down, because if the wash starts coming over, it will implode the still, which is not good, obviously.
Right, of course. 那他就是说这个线呢，直接可以从这边下面这边拉，然后拉那条线呢，然后这个就是会有一个这个木球，然后就会去敲这个蒸馏器。但他们那个蒸馏器呢，如果是那个水已经滚到这上面来的话呢，它敲的时候那个声音就会有比较没有那么响。对，那如果这边是安全，然后没有水滚上来的话呢，那它就是会比较空的声音。那所以他们就是用这样子的方式去测试说他们的这个火候啊，是不是有没有控制的好，然后这些酒汁啊，是不是有滚过去。That's such an interesting little thing there, I love that.
Yeah.
I wonder, do you know of anybody else that uses this kind of contraption?
I would imagine there must be at least one other distillery that does it, because that used to, before the industry moved over to steam, that was the way it was done. That was the only way. So it's interesting. It's like you go around Tomatin and there is a lot of technology and things, and
but there's little things like this.
It's pretty cool that despite all the technological advances that the industry has made, there are some things that still go back 200 years, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
You guys don't have like a rotary phone there, do you?
No, not yet. Not anymore. Not anymore. I must admit, I'm coming to you from a laptop and not a typewriter at the moment.
Okay, yeah. 对啊，我觉得所以这种真的蛮特别的。然后呢，然后其实他们刚刚说另外就是说对，他们在蒸馏的这个时段呢，他们 how long does like the first distillation run take in terms of total hours?
So, like off the top of my head, and it's been a while since I've been in the still house, just because of the whole COVID situation. It's been a while since I've been down there. The wash distillation takes around about the 6 hour mark, and then the spirit distillation takes around about the 9 hour mark. So, all in, your batch of barley. Let's go through it from your batch of barley. Your barley is milled into its grist. It then spends 6 hours in a mash tun.
Yeah.
It spends 103 hours in a fermentation vessel. It spends 103 hours. It spends 6 hours in a wash still, and then 9 hours in a spirit still before going into cask. So there's a lot of time in the production process if you follow one grain of barley.
And so you said the fermentation for the 103 starts like on a Friday morning kind of thing, I guess would be.
Well, it starts, when the mash is finished. So we're mashing all week.
Yeah.
What I was saying was the 53 hours is anything that's mashed on a Monday, Tuesday.
Okay.
The 103 is anything that's mashed on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and that lasts over the weekend.
Keep track of the 103.
Yeah.
所以他们这样整个过程嘛，你看大家可以思考一下，就是说从糖化，然后这样子6个小时，然后发酵103个小时，然后依次蒸馏呢是6个小时，然后呢二次蒸馏呢就变成是9个小时，第二次蒸馏就变9个小时。那所以其实这个整个过程是非常的长久。那另外就是说他们这个蒸馏的这个时段呢，就是说他们是大概蒸馏半个小时的时间就开始从酒头切入酒心的这个部分。那酒心他们就会去衡量大概到65%的这个酒精浓度的话，然后就会开始切酒尾。对，那他们这样子整个平均收下来的这个酒精浓度呢，他们的 new make 就变成是71%这样子。But then, so you mentioned the 71. I did read this somewhere, but then you guys are entering the cask in their 60s, right? Is that? Or you guys,
no. So what's? Yeah, well, yes, yeah, that's happening. So if you go back to the presentation and onto the next slide, I'll tell you a bit about that because that's important, very important. Yeah. So there we go. That is our new mix spirit coming off the still.
New mix spirit. Okay,
yeah. And like I said, everything right up until this point is science. The mashing is strictly controlled. The fermentation is strictly controlled. The distillation, it's all strictly timed and controlled to get us this liquid coming off the still. And that will be sitting, once that's come off the still and collected into a vessel, that sits at around about 71% ABV. But what we will do is we will add water into that to bring it to 63.5%. And that's very much an industry standard. There are some distilleries that will do some full strength, if you will, but the vast majority of distilleries are bringing their new mix spirit down to 63.5%. And there's two reasons. The first reason is very much a commercial one, which is the fact that the Scotch whisky industry is built on a history of trading. And it's much easier to trade like for like liquid. So say, for example, let's say Glenfiddich, just because they're the biggest worldwide. Glenfiddich are making a blend and they need Tomatin. What they would do is they would come to us and say, we've got casks of Glenfiddich at 63.5%. We want to trade you directly for the same number of casks of Tomatin. And that was the way. It was much easier. There is a second, more chemical reason, and that is that it is advantageous to start maturation at this strength. Your casks are made up with a combination of fatty molecules and acid molecules. And the fat is alcohol soluble and the acid is water soluble. And it means that by having the right balance, the right strength, which is effectively a balance of water and alcohol, you can extract both of those flavor compounds. If you enter the cask too strong, you're missing out on a lot of the acid molecules. And if you enter too light, you're missing out on a lot of the fat molecules. So there's a lot going on there, but yeah, we'll fill the cask at 63.5% ABV. But yeah, like I said, everything up until this point is science. When we move on to the next slide, we're getting into what I call the art of maturation.
我们刚刚在讨论就是说，因为我们刚刚有研究，就是他们的入桶，那大部分的这个苏格兰酒厂，他们也是入桶都是在63.5。那他说其中有2个主要的原因，就是一就是说，苏格兰酒厂他们也是希望就是整个产业有一个算是一致的一个入桶的一个规格。那像说如果像说某个酒厂想要买他们的酒然后跟他们的酒去做调和，那他就希望说两个 两个款项都是63.5，就是一致的这样子，然后他们好像比较好去做计算啊，然后跟做调和的这个计算等等的。那另外就是说，其实成年这个部分有很多各式各样的这些分子啊，各式各样的值啊，跟酸啊等等啊，同源物啊，那有些就是会就是需要水，然后有些也是比较需要酒精，那去产生这些风味。那就是说，如果你太高，这样说假设70几啊，或者怎么样入桶的话呢，那其实你的这个风味也不会，他们觉得说风味就比较不会那么满足，所以就是要他们研究过这样子63.5算是一个还不错，就是一个很好的比例，就是能够去利用到那个橡木桶里面所有的这些风味啊等等啊，那水分啊酒精啊有没有两个都可以有最完美的组合跟作用。对。Go ahead.
Perfect. So, yeah, if we go on to the next slide now, we will get to probably one of the most important parts in the Tomatin story. And that is the fact that, if you speak to any distillery in Scotland, they will tell you that up to 70% of the flavour from a cask comes from the maturation. But less than 10 distilleries in Scotland still have their own cooperage on site. And Tomatin is one of those distilleries. We still have our own cooperage on site, which means that every cask that comes through the distillery goes through this man's hand. This is Alan Bartlett, our head cooper. And he will assess every cask.
Making too many casts, I think.
Sorry?
I said he looks kind of tired. He's been making too many casts.
It is a difficult job, not one that I could do. Very, very labour-intensive job.
Yeah.
So every cask that comes to Tomatin, he assesses. He does a couple of checks on it, and then he assesses it for the quality. And then it goes on to be filled.
How many coopers are there on site?
How many, what, sorry?
How many coopers are there on site?
Just one now, just Alan. We used to have two. We used to have two, but Ian Duthie retired. So just the one man looking after every cask.
Wow. Just one-man show.
Yep, exactly.
He lives on site?
He does, yeah. And his mum and dad both work at the distillery as well.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. So Alan's a rare breed, if you will, because there's less than 300 coopers in Scotland right now. There are over 20 million casks, but only 300 people to look after them. And we've managed to get one, which is great. Now, what the cooperage allows us to do as a distiller, we will, of course, buy a lot of casks from centralised cooperages like the Speyside cooperage. We work with them very closely. But what having a cooperage on site allows us to do is work directly with wineries or breweries or spirits producers around the world, buy the casks directly from them and bring them to the distillery, because we can do all the work that we need to on site. Yeah. Now, that gives us a couple of benefits. The main one is that it allows us access to casks that the rest of the whiskey industry does not have. Because if the rest of the industry is buying from centralised cooperages, they're working out of the same kind of shopping basket. But we can go to a different store altogether. The 14-year-old that we're drinking right now is a great example, because we've got this access to the Symington Tawny Port casks purely because we have the cooperage on site. Another example over my shoulder here, we did a 15-year-old with a 5-year finish in Moscatel casks.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that one.
We sourced those casks directly from Vinos de Bacaloa, and we were able to do that because we have the cooperage on site. So for us,
and that I think the Muscatel, it was like a higher ABV too, wasn't it?
It was sitting at 46%. Yeah, so the same as the 14-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah. Compared to the normal expression, is that 40 or is that 43?
So our entry level expression is Legacy, and Legacy is at 43%, as is our 12-year-old.
Okay, 12 is 43. Okay, yeah.
So Legacy 12 at that kind of entry level, 43%. Then you get into the 14 and limited editions and things like that. So yeah, the importance of the cooperage can't be overstated. You know, it gives us so much control. And we talked at the beginning about Tomatin being a very, very versatile spirit. We can only showcase that versatility if we have access to a wide range of casks. If we only have access to bourbon and sherry casks, it doesn't matter how versatile the spirit is because we're not able to show it off. Having the cooperage allows us to be really, really active in that regard and be quite experimental. So a lot of our limited editions focus on different cask types. To my right here, see if my hand can come on the screen. Yeah, so right here I've got Cabernet Sauvignon and Amontillado, a couple of rum finishes that we've done. Really all about exploration of casks, and that's possible because of this man right here.
Do you guys ever, kind of alter the size of the cask, like bourbon to like hogsheads, or
Yeah, a lot of the time. So a lot of what will happen is the bourbon casks will arrive at Tomatin. They hold about 225 litres. And what we will do is Alan will do his checks. First of all, he's going to give them a quick nose, make sure there's no off notes. He's going to do air pressure and a water pressure test to make sure that they're sound, and he'll do any repairs that he needs to.
Yeah.
Those casks will then be filled with our spirit, whether it's new make or re-racking finishing spirit, and they'll be allowed to mature. Then once that whiskey is taken from the cask and bottled, those casks go back into the cooperage, and that's when they're broken down and reamed into hogsheads.
Okay, nice. Let me catch up a little bit. So I have another question for you, but let me catch up for a second here. 那他们就说，这个是他们的这个酒厂的这个算制桶师傅叫 Alan。然后呢 ，How long's been Alan been there on site now?
I would say Alan's probably been there the better part of 15 years.
15年，对，那就是算是师傅了，已经是他这个的资深师傅。然后他就说，他们整个苏格兰大概只有300多个这种 Cooper 这种制桶的师傅，然后其中一个就在他们这边工作。那原本他们有2个制桶师傅，然后现在就是因为其中一个退休了，然后他这个 Alan 就是现在就是在这边担任唯一的这个制桶的工作。Excuse me here， 然后呢，他就说他们另外就是说，很特别的部分就是说，因为他们这边有自己的这个制桶厂，那所以他们就可以就是接一些比较特别的啊，像刚刚我们有讨论到他们的那个雪莉不同的雪莉啊 ，Muscatel 啊 ，Amontillado 啊，然后何况是一些兰姆酒桶啊，或者是说他们也可以去更改传统的波本桶改成猪头桶，对不对？然后就是扩大啊，或是等等的啊。那所以这些，那他们觉得说这个是对他们来说是个非常大的一个优点，就是因为他们可以去做很多桶的上方面的实验啊，然后去把桶的这个 size 改一下、改规格啊等等的。Yeah, and I was going to ask you, my other question was like, do you guys do any kind of like, STR, like,
Yeah.
The shaving, toasting, and rechar and all that stuff on site as well? Does he have like a little blowtorch thing?
Okay, no, so we don't do that on site, purely because we don't have the fire. We call it dechar, rechar, but we'll work with the Speyside cooperage for that. It's just along the road. We'll send any casks that we want to go that way. So he's more involved in the making of casks and the quality checks and things. If it needs any more kind of actual work to the wood itself, goes to Speyside.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Great. I think that was everything that we on the cask. You know what? My other question was, have you so you were talking about all these different casks now. With the SWA change in rules in terms of like, traditional, you can use non-traditional casks. If you guys started using like tequila casks, like, I think it was Glenfiddich or no, Dewar's just came out with the world's first tequila mezcal cask whiskey, right?
Yeah. Now, I don't have my bottle here, which is rather annoying. But so Tomatin has another brand of whiskey. So Tomatin is what I would call our traditional Highland single malt brand. But for the last couple of weeks every year, we will put lightly peated barley through the distillery. And we change a lot of the processes. So it's shorter fermentation, faster distillation. And that goes on to be our Kubokken brand. So Kubokken, you will see, is like this.
Peated one,
Yeah, lightly peated. This is our Kubokken bottle. Now, this is our signature expression, which uses bourbon, virgin oak, and sherry casks. But with Kubokken, this is where my roles become quite. A lot of my time is spent on the whiskey making of Kubokken, and what we've very much been allowed to do is we have one core range product, and then everything else is a limited batch release. And the cool thing about that is that we don't have to worry about consistent supplies of casks. We can do anything we want. And so this year, we were actually the first distillery to take advantage of the new legislation, because about a week after the laws changed, we released a product which had been matured in Japanese shochu casks. Now, so this was an interesting thing about the old law. We were never allowed to bottle that previously.
How did that happen?
But there's absolutely no legislation about what you can actually mature in. You can put your whiskey into any cask you want and leave it maturing there. You're just not allowed to bottle it. So most distilleries won't experiment with casks that they're not allowed to use because of the fact there's no commercial prospects for this liquid. But we were talking a little bit off screen. Tomatin since the 1980s has been owned by a couple of Japanese companies, including Takara Shutsu. And Takara produced their own shochu, and some of it is oak-aged. So back in 2012, we got our hands on, I think it was about 20 shochu casks, and we put some of our peated spirit into it. So when we released that last year, we had a whiskey that had been finished in shochu casks for 7 years, which was really, really cool. And we were the first distillery to take advantage of the new legislation as a result.
Wow, that's interesting. 我们刚才讨论说，因为 SWA 它也有改变他们的法规嘛，就是有之前就是之前就是说你只能用一些传统的橡木桶去做陈年嘛，那就近期我们也有看到像一些酒厂或是一些品牌开始用一些龙舌兰的橡木桶啊，然后他们就说，因为他们其实汤马丁是他们的总公司是那个 Takara 日本的一个公司。那他们其实日本公司那边呢，他们有自己的这个烧酒，对，然后他们其实就已经有，其实他们说就是说很巧，就是他们之前就有在做实验，他们的威士忌去放入烧酒的桶里面去陈年，然后呢，这个法规就是一有效的时候，他们就出了这个新款的烧酒威士忌，我觉得超级酷的。然后因为他说其实这个法规还没有有效的之前，他们就只是做实验，他们其实也不能够装瓶，然后说是苏格兰威士忌嘛，所以他们所以其实就是这个法规这个有效之后呢，他们就立刻出他们的烧酒的汤马丁。I wonder if is that still that was a while ago. It's probably so that edition is probably gone, right?
No. There's so it was released last year. There's still stock of it. So it's I don't know how much of it has come over to Taiwan, but it's certainly available to come over. So Kubokken Creation 2, as I believe Stanley just mentioned there, it's so Creation 1 was a combination of Muscatel and Imperial Stout casks. Creation 2 was the Japanese shochu and European virgin oak. So yeah. Now it's funny because when we're talking about this use of casks, we think of it as a very new thing, the kind of cask exploration that Bill Lumsden was doing up at Glenmorangie in the 1990s is seen as pioneering. But back in 1909, Tomatin, the original company that was established, was bought over by two families from England. And one of them was a wine merchant. And we found a couple of years ago our old warehouse book. So it recorded every cask that was filled between 1909 and 1927, every single cask. And of course, there was a lot of sherry casks back then. But what you also find in those pages is rum, brandy, muscat, Madeira, port. So this idea of experimenting with casks, it's something that we've done at Tomatin for over 100 years now, which is absolutely mind-boggling when you think of that in the traditional time frame of Scotch whiskey, you know?
Yeah, 他就是说他之前有找到，他们也有找到他们的之前的一些笔记本，然后就是从1900年代、00年代到1920年代，他们就是也是其实有用很多不一样的桶啊，例如兰姆酒啊，例如雪莉啊、马特拉啊，有没有等等桶啊，所以就是说他们其实就是这个实验的这个精神，其实就是一直在他们的酒厂里面存在。So I'm gonna up the ante here a little bit. I'm gonna pour a little bit of this now.
Fantastic. Is that an Oloroso cask? Is it?
Well, so it doesn't really say. Oh yeah, first fill Oloroso sherry butt.
Yeah, cool. So what I'm going to do, that's 2006. So let's talk a little bit about single casks. But while you do that, I'm going to pour myself a 2006 single cask, Amontillado cask, Amontillado sherry.
Nice. It's so interesting because in a Amontillado cask, I imagine it is going to be even more expensive than getting a sherry cask, right? Just because of the rarity of it.
Well, yeah.
You don't really see that much of it at all. I mean, how many Amontillado or Muscatel casks do you really see?
Here's the thing: they are rarer in the sense that they're not commonly used in the whiskey industry. But there's just as much Amontillado sherry produced in Jerez as there is Oloroso. So they're not any more expensive. And the reason for that is that although they're not seen as often, they're not as often sought after. So there's a lot more distilleries competing for Oloroso sherry casks than there is Amontillado. We were able to get a couple of Amontillado casks, and they're lovely, lovely things. But actually, let's talk about single casks, private casks. So at Tomatin, we don't let you buy a cask of spirit and let it mature on site and then bottle it. What we do is we offer a private cask program where if you are an individual, a retailer, a whiskey club, a bar, and you're interested in bottling your own cask of Tomatin single malt, we will send over samples at the age or the price point that you're looking at, and then you select that and we're able to bottle it for you. So what you have there is a private cask that was bottled for Taiwan. What I have is a private cask that was bottled for the malt room in Inverness. So you can see it's totally customizable. Comes in a lovely gift box as well, So this is something that is a pretty important part of the business in Taiwan. And I think, if you look at Scotch whisky as a whole in that market, there's a lot more single casks representation. So it is something that you'll see more often from Tomatin with our new distribution partnership in the market.
Yeah, so you do see this is an old bottle, but you guys so the single casks look like these now.
Yeah, like what I've got here.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, exactly. So I have seen a couple of those, and the color on the one that I saw was like, oh man, it was like soy sauce,
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to figure out. Yeah, so I have one here, oddly enough, that was bottled for China, not Taiwan, but for China. I've got one at home, but so the single cask program is pretty cool because we've got a variety of cask types on offer. So that next year, for example, there will be Muscatel casks available. There will be red wine casks available. There's going to be some sherry casks available, but for me, I love the bourbon casks. I love that sprightly, fruity flavors that you get in Tomatin. They're 9 years old, Oloroso sherry. That's a lovely style of Tomatin as well.
Yeah. 所以他们刚刚在讨论，我们在讨论就是单桶原酒啊等等啊，然后他们就说，他们其实现在也在发展就是 单桶原酒啊。那所以如果是任何人啊，或是酒吧啊、社团啊，都可以去找他们包桶。那我刚刚也有看到，我刚刚有跟他说，就是现在市面上我最近好像也在网络上面看到一些酒庄也有包自己的那个汤马丁的单桶，然后我就说，那个就是重学历炸弹，然后呢，就是那个颜色就是非常深，然后我就说是像酱油那样子，对啊，这就是。对，所以我觉得，所以我重点是说，我觉得他们的这个单桶实在是也是真的非常不错。那像我这一支是2016年啊，然后我这个是9年的这个单桶原酒，就是初次的 Oloroso Sherry Butt， 对，然后它是总共是有648桶，所以实在是这个是非常不错的。那大家可以让他去考虑。Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. So actually, the next slide is almost a perfect place to move on to while we're talking about single casks.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So once we've produced the casks, we obviously have to mature it. Now, Tomatin in the 1970s expanded rapidly. And a big part of expansion is making sure that you've got enough space to put the casks. So in the 1970s, we built a lot of warehousing that would hold that 12.5 million litres a year. So we've got 13 warehouses on site now, capable of holding around about 250,000 casks.
Yeah.
And that is very important because it means that every single cask of Tomatin that we produce is matured on site.
Yeah.
We don't mature off-site. You know, a lot of distilleries now, particularly in smaller remote areas or new distilleries, have to take a lot of their whiskey off-site and mature in the central belt where there's a lot of warehousing space. We don't have to do that. And it means that, you know, I don't know how, there's no scientific way really of proving that where you are has an impact on flavor. But in kind of hedging our bets and saying that there's going to be some influence. So a good point of recognition is, you know, the Angel share in Scotland is normally 2% of the contents of the cask every year. At Tomatin, it's only 1.5%. There's a slower, more gentle maturation at Tomatin. So every cask that we produce is matured on site in our warehouse. And what you see here is Warehouse 6. It's one of the oldest buildings at Tomatin. It's a traditional dunnage warehouse. These casks here are stowed 3 high. It's a cask of every year that we have. But beyond that, in that warehouse, the casks are 1 high at ground level.
Yeah, I can see the 2013, 2012, 2011, 2010, 2009.
All the way back to 1967, which is our oldest.
67, nice. Wow. 他刚刚就说，他们之前就是有没有？我们之前有讨论过说，酒厂那时候就是有增加蒸馏器啊，那当然也要增加，就是这个他们的这个酒窖啊。那他们其实有25万的这个桶的这个酒窖的空间。那所以呢，他们就说其中一个他们的酒呢，所有他们的酒都是在他们这个酒厂这里去做陈年，对，然后那我们当然也知道说有些酒厂他们或许蒸馏之后呢，他们就会把他们的酒带去其他的区块，像或许一些岛屿啊，何况是一些等等的比较偏远的地方的酒厂啊，他们或许就是会移动到高地啊，或是一些比较中央的一个区块去做陈年，对。那他们就是说他们的酒全部都是自己的酒窖陈年，他们的这个酒窖也是这种传统的 dunnage 的这个种类的酒窖，就是这种算是比较低啊，然后就只有大概3个这样子层次这样子的酒窖，对。And then looks like it's cement floors there as well.
So the cement goes back to the first layer of cask. From then onwards, it's all open earthen floor with a couple of cement walkways, but it's all earthen floor after that.
I was going to say, because if you're talking, we're talking about the traditional dunnage.
Yeah.
Now,
the reason that is cement is that this is where our tour route comes. So that door at the far end, if you come on tour, you'll walk past these casks. You get people taking pictures with the year they were born, or I've seen one woman getting a photo of the cask of the year that she got a divorce, which was quite funny. But then, so that has to be cement for health and safety reasons. Right, everything past that is earth floor.
那我刚刚问他说，这看起来好像就是水泥嘛？这个路线在那个这些酒这个橡木桶的路线前面就是水泥。那我们知道说那种非常传统的那种 dunnage 的那种 warehouse 呢，就是这种酒窖，它其实都是用土地土地，然后不是用水泥，然后就说那我们说看到说这个是用水泥，他就说他只是这个第一排，因为他们就是那个导游的时候要经过的时候呢，他们这个就是比较安全，然后就是有这个部分是用水泥，但是后面这一排这些橡木桶后面全部都是泥，就是一般的土地的这个土地的地板这样子，对，go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So then I think we move on to the last slide, because that's what ties it all together. You know, we've got all this wonderful production, we've got this beautiful whiskey line and cask, but then when it comes from taking that whiskey from its piece of wood into a product, this is the man who kind of is in control of it all. Yeah. This is our master distiller, Graham Unson, and so his name is on every bottle of what we make. He is, you know, as much as I am involved in cask selection and whiskey making, you know, if there's anything wrong, the buck stops with him, as we would say. But yeah, so Graham, let's talk a little bit about him, because a week past Thursday, he celebrated his 30th year in the whiskey industry.
Oh, wow.
And he's built a career on making some of the most well-known Highland single malt whiskies. Yeah. And it kind of feeds into what he does today at Tomatin. So his name's Unson. He's from Orkney, and he started his career. I know you had was it James on from Highland Park a while ago? Well, Graham actually started his career at Scapa Distillery, not Highland Park. So he worked in the mashing at Scapa Distillery, and then in 1994, unfortunately, Scapa shut down for a little while, and he moved to Glendronach Distillery. So he made Glendronach for a while. Then he moved to Glenmorangie Distillery, and wonderful. He was the distillery manager at Glenmorangie for about 13 years, through the 90s and early thousands, and that was when Dr. Bill Lumsden was doing all of his research into the wood, the cask types, the wine types. So while Bill was doing this extensive exploration, Graham was the man on the ground making the spirit and filling it into the casks. So he built up this incredible wealth of information about maturation, how spirit works with wood. Not just, you know, it's an interesting thing that Graham subscribes to as well. You can't just take any spirit and put it into an interesting wood type, because it might not work. You have to have an understanding of how that spirit will interact with that flavor. And that's what he's incredibly good at. Yeah. Then, after his time at Glenmorangie Distillery, he reopened Glenglassach Distillery. So Glenglassach Distillery lay dormant for many years. It was bought by a Russian company, and Graham was the man reopening it. And then when Glenglassach was bought by Billy Walker and the Ben Riach Group, Graham came to Tomatin Distillery, where he's been for the better part of a decade now. And he's now responsible for overseeing every cask that lies in our warehouse and making our incredible single malts out of it. So what you see him holding there is our 50-year-old, which we released a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Wow. Very nice.
Yeah.
Does he live on campus as well?
No, his son does. His son is one of our still men. He lives on site. Graham lives out in, I think it's Port Soy, it's called, which is near, when he reopened Glenglassach, he bought his house out there. But he travels in every day. He's at the distillery every day.
Gotcha. 那是他们的首席蒸馏师。And you say he's been there at Tomatin for over 10 years now, you said, right?
For around about, I think he joined in 2011, so nearly a decade. And then last year, because he came to Tomatin as our distillery manager, and then last year we promoted him to master distiller and production director.
Gotcha. 他之前呢，就是他的背景故事，就是说他其实是 Orkney 岛的人，so he's a Viking.
Yeah. He's got a very Swedish look about him.
Yeah, he does a little bit. Yeah. 然后他就是 Orkney 岛，他之前在那个 Scapa 酒厂工作，然后他之后又到了格兰多纳 ，Glendronach you said right?
Yeah.
然后格兰多纳，然后他还去了格兰杰，那他那时候也有跟那个格兰杰的那个 Dr. Bill 他们那边的那个蒸馏师有学习啊，跟合作过啊，等等啊，交流啊，那所以他就是还蛮丰富的经验。他之前，然后还没到塔马丁这边之前，他就是在那个 Glenglassaugh 那边也是帮他们就是制酒。等等，然后现在他已经在塔马丁这边10几年了，然后现在他手中的那就是30几年，他手中的是50年的 50-year one, right? Yeah. Also, I guess I should drink this one then. I did my last dram.
Absolutely.
For marriage be the 这个是那个塔马丁30年。Yeah.
So the 30-year-old is one of our batch releases. So our core range is Legacy 12-year-old.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, the core range has Legacy 12-year-old, cask strength 14 and 18-year-old. And then we have our series of batch releases, which includes Tomatin Decades, which is a multi-vintage vatting, and it also includes a 30-year-old. So we will release one batch of 30-year-old every year. It's only 10 casks that go into the 30-year-old. It's limited to 3,000 bottles a batch. And within that, you have 75% first fill bourbon barrels and 25% refill hogsheads.
Yeah.
Wonderful tropical explosion. You know, if you leave Tomatin in a cask for a very long time, it becomes this incredible tropical, rancio-driven flavors. Yeah. So just one last thing on Graham. I think what he does is he ties together that science of distillation and the art of maturation very well. You know, he's spent 30 years producing Highland spirit, and he brings that to the science of a distillation. He then spent a lot of time learning about wood and maturation, and having him being able to work at a distillery that has its own cooperage on site is a match made in heaven. And it means that we're able to have so much control over the liquid that he then goes on to bottle, which includes the 30-year-old. He, of course, is in charge of every batch of 30-year-old that we produce.
Yeah, this one's actually, this is like more of a kind of like a, just to do a comparison. This one is a sherry. This is more of a kind of a golden, more golden than it is kind of like a amber.
So what you've got there between the two, and this is an interesting point because I think it's very often the case that people think, darker is better and sherry is better. And it's not always the case. In young whiskies, darker is a sign of a lot of cask influence, So in that 9-year-old that you've got there, that's quite dark, and it's a sign that there's a lot of cask influence there, which is exactly what you want on a young whiskey. But for me, when you get to the kind of 25-year-old and above, what I'm looking for is non-active wood. I'm looking for casks that have lain in a warehouse. They've not put too much flavor into the spirit because 30 years of wood maturation is very woody, very oaky. What you're looking for in older whiskey is oxidation. And that's just where the liquid's evaporated from the cask. The oxygen has broken up the alcohol and the acids and created new esters in the liquid. And you get this wonderful burst of fruit flavors. We've always said quite jokingly that making very good Tomatin is not difficult. You've just got to have an old cask and a long waiting time, and you'll get an incredible whiskey at the end of the day. So for me, an older whiskey, darker isn't necessarily better. With that sort of golden color, that brownish gold is what you want, and the 30-year-old's ideal for that.
Yeah, this is golden. It's just a really kind of golden straw kind of kind of color here. And it's a lovely whiskey. I mean, that's why I got it. So,
yeah. You'll get a huge amount of tropical fruit there as well. Huge fruit.
非常非常热带水果。那刚刚就是说，其实我们大家也应该也是知道啦，就是说，一个威士忌的这个颜色，并不代表一切。当然了，因为就是说，比较深的颜色不代表说好喝，那比较浅的颜色也不代表说不好喝。那所以他就是说，他们的30年呢，其实就是一个非常水果、非常平衡的一个酒款。那同时，其实我也是非常同意，就是说这个30年呢，他刚刚有提到一个形容词叫做 rancio。I actually kind of like that word because I should use it more often。那就是就是非常漂亮的那样子的木质调，非常就是有平衡度。那你喝的时候，这款我觉得30年这款呢，你喝下去呢，就是非常的温顺舒服，因为它还是维持它的30年，虽然30年之后它还是维持它的这个酒厂的这个调，它并没有被橡木桶影响到，说已经是辨别不出来，说还是汤马丁这个酒厂。And then so this is a combination also of you said 10 casks, right?
Yeah, 10 casks. What you're looking at there, three quarters are first fill bourbon barrels from the 1980s, 30-year-old casks. What you'll probably find in there quite often is 1988. We have lovely bourbon barrels from 1988. Then the final 25% is refill hogsheads. And those refill hogsheads have been overaged, so they're coming from the 1970s. So you've got a little bit of 40-year-old liquid in there, and that's where you get this. The bourbon barrels give you the finish, the nose, the aroma that you're getting is from those refill hogsheads.
Yeah. That's a good one. I haven't had. This has been in my bunker for a little bit. I haven't cracked it open in a while.
Right. Yeah.
那他刚刚就是说，他每个批次呢，就是用10个桶去做一个批次，然后他说很多就是从80年代、88年的那些波本桶啊，或是用2次波本桶啊，然后跟一些雪莉猪头桶啊，然后去做了一个这样子的一个对勾，然后出了这个批次，我觉得它真的就是非常好。然后 I think just in general, I guess just to talk about the overall, even the whiskeys that we're drinking now is just kind of hit it home with Tomatin just being this very you guys do what you guys say on your label, right? It's the softer side of the Highlands, right?
Yeah.
So that is your distillery character, and it's you're true to that label, right?
I would say so. I think it is. That came from a place. That tagline came from a place of understanding that the regions, the whiskey regions that we know, Campbellton, Lowlands, Speyside, Islay, and the Highlands, they historically provided a great roadmap for consumers to navigate the category. But nowadays, with distilleries being so much more experimental and complex, it's not the greatest way to uncover whiskey. What we wanted to point out with that is that Tomatin is a classic Highland whiskey, but it's not peated. It's not sharp. It's not robust. This is absolutely beautiful drinking whiskey. Very soft, very elegant, very fruity. Just wonderful, wonderful liquid with a variety of casks and a variety of maturations. And it means that, there's something for everyone. I love doing a tasting, a Tomatin tasting, because what you tend to find, if you've got a distillery that only matures in sherry casks, you tend to find that if you're in a tasting and you ask, what's your favorite? 9 out of 10 will say the oldest one. But at Tomatin, when I'm doing a tasting, say there's 100 people in the room and we're drinking 5 whiskies, you will have 20 people like the first, the second, third, a wild split of people. And it's brilliant to be able to engage with people at different levels of maturation, price point. It's a great, great thing.
这边有there's somebody says, Stanley says decades too.
Yeah.
is a good one too. I think
Now this is a difficult maneuver I'm going to have to do, because right now my laptop is sitting on my Decades 2 box. But if you give me just a moment, I will rectify that.
Another box, swap out.
There we go, the box swap. So this is Decades 2. It'd probably be better if we pull the presentation down and I show you this from here. So if you want to put us onto the split screen. So there we go. So Graham's predecessor was a man called Dougie Campbell. And I mentioned Dougie earlier. You might not have picked up on it. His son, Colin, is the one who works in the warehouse. And Dougie was the manager for he worked at the distillery for 53 years. So back in 2011, when Dougie retired, we asked him to pick a cask from each of the decades that he had worked at Tomatin and to marry them all together into one product. And we had this incredible liquid. And then last year, when Graham was promoted to master distiller, we asked him to do a similar thing and to pick whiskies from the last 50 years and marry them together into Decades 2.
Decades 2.
What you have here is you have, let's see if I can get this right. You have whiskey. Is that it? Yeah. You have whiskey from 1973, 1975, 1977, 1988, 1995, 2000, 2009, and 2013, all married together into 3,400 bottles. Now, I think the cynical, the pessimistic thing to do would be to say, so you've used a whole load of 2013 and put a teaspoon of everything else in. That's not the case. A quarter of the liquid in this bottle is from the 1970s. Over 60% of what we've used here is over 25 years old. What we're trying to do with this product is give you a real kind of showcase of all of the whiskey that we have at Tomatin. This is a snapshot into our whole stock portfolio in one bottle. It is absolutely delicious stuff. It has that tropical fruit flavor that you're getting from the 30-year-old there, but it also has a big burst of sherry from the 1980s. There's some lovely, vibrant spices from the 2000s. They're in recharred Verdeo casks, which have this wonderful French oak. The younger spirit is from 2013, so it has a lot of citrus notes to it. It is, I guess, the best way to sum it up would be a distillation of Tomatin.
Yeah. So do you know if there's if it's all a combination of bourbon and sherry, or if there's any kind of unique cask like a port or muscatel?
Yeah. So the original decades, Dougie was a master of spirit production, and so the original decades just had bourbon and sherry. But as I said, Graham picked every single cask for decades, and Graham is a master of wood, if you want. So what we've got from the 1970s, you have the refill hogsheads. The refill hogsheads are what's going to give you that wonderful, elegant, fruity flavor of old Tomatin. 1976 and 77 Tomatin is revered around the world. Then from the 1980s, we've got Oloroso sherry butts. From the 1990s, we have first fill bourbon barrels. The 2000s are recharred Verdeo hogsheads. So Verdeo, a white wine from Spain, the casks have been recharred. And from 2013, we have French oak casks. So each decade has a different style of maturation in there.
70s was what, sherry, and then 80s was also sherry?
No, the 70s was refill hogsheads.
Refill hogsheads.
Refill American oak casks, yeah.
American oak hogsheads?
Yeah.
And then 80s was also sherry.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then bourbon, and then white wine, and then French oak. Okay, very nice.
So really, really cool mix of casks, and they come together beautifully. The flavors are, it's just incredible the way that very often I find that when you marry vintages together, you have this stacking of flavors. It's very distinctive. You have the 70s, then the 80s. What you have here, they all bind together into one whiskey, and it's very difficult to nose it and go, oh, well, that flavor is from these casks and that flavor is from these casks. It is just almost like walking into Warehouse 6 at Tomatin and taking this wonderful deep breath in and just breathing in the environment that you have at Tomatin in one product. In terms of price point, Decade sits in between the 18-year-old and the 30-year-old. So it kind of sits alongside a lot of 25-year-old whiskies, but you've got whiskey in there that's much, much older and much, much younger. It's this wonderful balance of what our distillery is. So Stanley, I hope you've been able to try some of that yourself, but if not, there is still a little bit of stock available. This was released late last year. So Tomatin was the first distillery to do that multi-vintage bottling back in 2011. Since then, you've seen Glen Grant and Tom and Toole have done a Decades expression. There has been a Karazawa Decades, and I was reading recently...
Done it too. Macallan, I think, has done it.
I don't know if Macallan have, but I was reading recently that Dalmore are going to be doing a Decades of Dalmore project. But yeah, Tomatin was... we're very happy to have pioneered this because it's a new way of whiskey making. You know, if we were to put the age on this bottle, we'd have to call it a 6-year-old, which is crazy because it's only 20% of the liquid.
Well, I also like Balvenie, like Ton. The Balvenie Ton is kind of like
exactly. So the Balvenie Ton is a similar style of concept. They don't focus on the individual ages, which is quite bizarre, but they're doing a similar thing where they're pulling different vintages together. And it's just a beautiful way of making whiskey because it gives people an insight into the whole portfolio rather than just one little part of it.
Yeah， 那我们刚刚就是在讨论蛮久，就是他们的这个 Decades 产品。Can you show us the Decades inside again? Yeah， 就是说这个 Decades 的产品，他们这个就是他们会去挑选从1970、80、90、2000、2010年代的不同的一些他们觉得是非常优秀的一些橡木桶，然后会去调出来他们这个 Decades 第一款跟 Decades 第二款。那现在是去年他们就出 Decades 2，然后我们这个 Stanley 朋友就是有提到说这样子。然后那刚刚他有说明说，那像你看哦，像这支酒，它1970、80年代，那这样子都是已经是有没有40几年前的酒了。然后那这样子他们他刚刚跟我说1970年那时候是用 refill 的那个猪头桶，美国橡木猪头桶，然后80年是用 Oloroso， 然后呢90是用波本桶，然后呢2000年呢是用他们的一个葡萄酒桶，然后2010年是用他们的一个法国橡木桶，然后去做这样子的一个组合。然后呢我们的 Stanley 朋友就是非常喜欢，然后这个 Scott 他也是非常觉得非常的优秀，非常厉害。那真的是让我自己也想要喝，因为好像我还没喝过。I don't think I actually had that one, so I might have to go search that one out.
It's worth looking for. I'm telling you. I think it's probably my favorite Tomatin expression at the moment. You know, I always say the 14-year-old is my favorite in the core range, but Decades, just because it does just encapsulate everything that Tomatin's about. It's a wonderful expression, so absolutely look out for it. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, you know, does anybody have any questions out there they want to ask, or you know, ask Scott or anything about Tomatin? You know, it's a 2-hour show, 2-hour long show. So some people might have had to go to sleep, but I'm sure people can see this on the playback.
Absolutely. And if anyone does have any questions, they can reach out to me directly. I'm on probably the easiest place is Instagram at Scotch Adamson. So I'll put that in the chat and you can copy it in, just so if anyone picks this up on the replay and they do want to ask any questions, they absolutely can. And of course, Tomatin's on there as well. So ask us directly as a distillery or me directly, and we'd be more than happy to answer them.
I'm going to share also the Taiwan Facebook page.
Yep. Perfect.
Here. It's a Tomatin TW.
Yeah.
那大家有什么问题的话，这边也可以去我们这个台湾的这个进口商这个 FB 的这个粉丝页面 facebook.com/TomatinTW。 对，然后他们就是不知道说 Angel，I wonder if Angel's still with us. Angel, is Stanley's not with Stanley's not with the importer, is he?
Good question. I hope so, because he seems to know a lot about Tomatin, so that would be someone that I'd want to work with.
Yeah, Ting Chung Lu. That's not the Taiwan team, is it? No, okay. But I know Angel is. Angel's still there? No, maybe not. It's okay. I won't hold it against you.
Yeah.
好，那我们这边也可以分享，就是说，他的那个 Scott 的 IG 就是 @Scotch_Adamson。对，那大家也可以去就是关注，就是follow 他，然后有什么问题也可以问他，或是有什么问题需要说明的，也可以直接联络台湾的汤马丁啊，或是其实也可以联络我啊，跟我们分享啊，对不对？对 ，OK， 好，那现在，那 Stanley， 你是住台中吗？还是住哪里啊？好奇，因为其实我们现在这个线上就只有几个朋友 ，It's only like a few people, and I wanted to reward everybody for coming by from stopping in. But I'm in Taichung.
Right.
But I was gonna. So usually what I do is I ask a trivia question.
Okay.
I ask a trivia question and see who was paying attention. And so I also have a friend here. His name is Harry. He's always tunes into our show, and he always wins every single time, without fail. But I actually wanted to offer people because we have a whiskey kind of clubhouse here in Taichung. So I wanted to offer people a pour of both the 14 and 30 year if they come and pay us a visit. Yeah.
Nice.
所以就是我刚刚就是说新竹 OK 好，那我就想说，如果是有朋友到台中来的话呢，我们现在问一些问题，然后呢看大家谁可以回答。那可以到台中来的话，我就会跟大家分享我们的14年跟这个30年汤马丁，对，然后就是跟大家分享，就是这算是一个小礼物，就是送给大家，然后呢因为我们现在也只有9个人在线上，所以感谢大家一直听到最后面。但是我还是想要问一些问题，然后呢看大家记不记得。Or let's have Scott ask a question, a trivia question, to see if people have been paying attention, huh?
Perfect. Let's go for.
Think of something that you discussed during our talk here that you'd like to, and see if people were actually listening.
We'll go for something pretty simple. Let's go for what was the name of the man who founded Tomatin Distillery in 1897?
Okay. 好，那就是说这个在1897年，就是建立这个汤马丁酒厂的这个先生，他名字叫什么？大家记得吗？大家记不记得？1897 1897年的这个创办人就是 I guess you call him the founder, right? Of Tomatin, is that what you call him?
The founder, yeah.
创办人是谁？Somebody said Tomatin? No.
Yeah, that would have been a good one. Everyone's Googling, which is quite funny because I think if you just scroll up on the chat, Alex has actually put it in the chat earlier on today.
Yeah, so. I'm surprised. Maybe my friend Harry is not Harry's not on with us right now. But he's always like the first one right there.
Yeah.
Harry, are you there?
I'll need to ask that question as a trivia one more often. That was quite a good one. There we go. Harry's got it. Harry has got it.
Oh, there you go, Harry. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'll ask a question as well. So I was going to ask, how long is the fermentation for Tomatin single malt? 就是这个汤马丁它这个发酵的这个时间是大概是站在这个几个小时。
That's an interesting one because you've asked for the single malt specifically rather than just, generally what do we do? That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
No early takers, eh?
Yeah. Well, there's also like a delay.
Yeah.
Okay. 803.
I'm going to start calling Harry Mr. Copy and Paste.
Yeah. Harry, 你到时候来台中的时候，下次来台中再请你喝这个14年跟30年。So I just invited Harry if he comes to Taichung. I'll share a 14 and 30 year with him.
Nice. Worth the trip.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add there, Scott? This has been a pleasure, and it's been great. And I learned a lot in terms of so one of the things that I learned and kind of took me by surprise was the actual duration of the fermentation, because really rare. I think so in my readings, I think Glen Elgin is like another one of those that ferments like 100 hours, but there's maybe like, I don't know, half a dozen maybe, or not even, Cardew I think is only like 70 or something, or was it Oaken? I think I can't remember if it's Oaken or Cardew. They're like the higher, 60, 70 hour fermentations, but then like 103, I was like, oh wow, not that many.
No, it's definitely a long one. It really is. It's a cool part of the story, and it's nice to take people in. And if you ever get over to see us, Alex, when we go into the tun room, we'll try it. We actually try the wash and and taste it, and it's really distinctive. I think.
You say it's like that beer. It's like that
yeah, it's like that goose beer from Belgium. That sort of saison sour beers. They're lovely.
Yeah.
It's a really important part because the lightness of Tomatin, the elegance comes from the distillation, but the foundation of flavor comes from fermentation. And if you get that step right, kind of all tickles along from there. So I think we've got that right. In terms of anything I want to add, not a huge amount. I think we've covered a lot of the production and the history today. All I'd like to add is that I can't wait to come back over and see you all in Taiwan. I was there last year for a couple of nights, only in Taipei, and loved it. Fantastic. The night markets and things like that. Such a vibrant city, such a beautiful country. I was meant to be coming over this year a couple of times, but as we know, life got in the way, shall we say. I look forward to coming over and hopefully meeting everyone that's tuned in person and sharing a dram with you over a glass. And
that'd be great.
Answer any questions. But no, until then, thank you for your time, Alex. And
thanks to Unique 99 as well. Unique, all you guys. And thanks to Taman, thanks to Scott. And hopefully we'll see you guys around here. I mean, is the distillery actually open right now?
Yeah, so production is going on. We are producing, like I say, Monday to Friday. In terms of from a visitor point of view, it is open on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So basically what we're doing is we're operating tours when the production workers are at home to protect them. So you won't see much going on in terms of activity. You'll see fermentation bubbling away. You'll be able to see the distillery, but of course at the moment as well, it's quite busy. So book in advance is what I would recommend if you find yourself in Scotland.
Yeah. So I get I guess like technically we still could go to Scotland and brave the the pandemic, I guess.
I would suggest, like most places right now, my wife and I, we were planning a trip to New York and to Tokyo,
Yeah.
Even if we were able to go right now, I wouldn't go because you're not going to get the full experience. And I would suggest that it's the same story about Scotland. So save your money and come in a couple of years when everything's back to normal and have the proper Scottish experience.
I was gonna say, because like, even though you guys are open for tours, are the people of Scotland welcoming of like Americans and everybody running around? And
yeah, it's a strange situation. I think if you asked me that a couple of months ago, I would have said no, because what happened, so we're in the Highlands, right? And the Highlands is a beautiful part of the world. So what you were finding is that everyone from the UK who would normally have booked a holiday abroad, they were taking their camper van and going to the north of Scotland. And you would find small remote communities blocking off the road so that they couldn't come in. Back at the start when we thought that this was going to be so much worse than it was. Now there is that element of, our businesses need to survive. We've got the Scottish Highlands its two main industries are whiskey and tourism, and the tourism side is gone. So there's a lot of people struggling. So we are welcoming of it. I think what we're welcoming of is if you stay in a hotel and you buy your dinner in restaurants and things like that. What they're not so welcoming of is people in camper vans who don't stay in a hotel and they buy all their food in a supermarket and they don't help the local economies. So if you're going to the north of Scotland, please help the local businesses.
Good tip. Yeah, it's a good tip. Yeah.
It's a good tip for everywhere, right? It's a good tip for wherever you are in the world. Support your local businesses right now. They need your help.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think I don't know if the travel has travel ban's been lifted to like Isla. I think they because of such a small community there, they really don't want any kind of and they don't even have the capacity to really treat people in places, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of small, like even Tomatin is a very small rural village. There's no capacity for that. We're very lucky that we've got Inverness close by. If you go to places like Isla or Campbellton is another example. It's just please wait.
我刚刚跟他讨论，就是说关于就是观光啊，因为他们其实酒厂现在还在制酒，那他们5、6日还是有开放，就是这个 tour。那我就好奇跟他讨论说，那这样子像如果是美国人啊，或是其他国家人去酒厂，他们会有点排斥啊，或是害怕啊。然后就说前几个月是或许会有，但是现在他们面临到比较现实的问题，就是说，当然大家还是要生存，还是要赚钱。那所以像这种苏格兰的高地这个区块，有没有他们唯一的他们的唯一的产业就是威士忌跟这个餐旅跟旅游这样子。那所以他们也是硬着头皮要去面对啦，坦白说。那他就说，其实有点像台湾，像我们很多台湾人现在都不出国，所以就是会去澎湖啊、各式的东岸啊等等啊不同的地方去旅游。那他就说，也很多这些英国人啊，会就是直接开车去他们那些高地的小镇啊等等地方。那其实也有一些小镇，他们就直接把路挡起来，不让你进去。对啊，
Alex, I think you've muted yourself accidentally. I think you've muted yourself by accident. You're on mute. There you go.
Okay. What I was saying is, I think it's just kind of like Taiwan. Nobody's traveling internationally, so everybody's like just traveling domestically. So you have people like swarming into places that that have never gone to these domestic places. So it's kind of like it's actually been helpful to some of the smaller communities here. Because people aren't going to Japan or Scotland or America and things like that. So But yeah, people still are struggling, obviously, because overall you're not getting any international travel, which actually accounts for a bigger portion, I think, right?
Of course.
Gary says, my friend from the US says, will Decades 2 be released in the US market? I imagine it will be. I mean, I can't imagine. No, it's not?
No, it won't. So we only did 3,400 bottles, and they're only 70 cl. So we never actually bottled any in the 750 ml that you need to for the United States.
Oh, wow. Was Decades 1 available in the US? No.
I believe it might have been, actually. I think it might have been all those years ago, because it was just so much more of a market. It's obviously still our biggest market worldwide, but I think what we'll find is when we move on to a third batch of Decades, you'll probably see that go into the United States. You might find some Decades going into Canada because they are able to accept 700 ml bottles. So that's a possibility.
Yeah. Harry was asking, if Tomatin would be willing to throw like a party in Taiwan, much like our Beg Day, or like what's the other one that does part? Glenn Farkless does like a big 105 party.
Right. Well, I am more than willing to throw a party. The question is, are unique. So hopefully we'll get back to normality quite soon. So just for everyone's understanding, we moved to a new partner in Taiwan just a year ago. So part of my year was going to be coming over and doing lots of events with them this year, but obviously that's been put on hold. So hopefully going into next year, we'll be able to do some pretty exciting stuff together, and I'll be able to come over and do some nice events. So Harry, I don't know exactly what the future holds, but hopefully there will be some form of event that I'll get to meet you at.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you're going to throw a party, let me know, and I'll be there.
Yeah, I will let you know.
All right. Well, so Gary says, darn, I have a bottle of Decades 1. I was hoping to do a comparison.
You'll
find some. You just got to go online, buy it online.
Yeah, there will be online retailers that will be able to ship to the States, or they'll find a way around it. So it's not an impossible purchase, but you just might not find it at your local liquor store, I'm afraid, Gary.
Yeah.
I will be coming to the US as well. I just saw that. Yeah, I was spending a lot of time there this year, but again, same situation as the rest of the world. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, and then Harry or Gary. You can look at the replay here. View the replay. We got 2 hours and 46 minutes of Tomatin talk.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Scott. And I'm going to go to bed. And thanks everybody for tuning in. 谢谢大家。然后呢，我们就先跟大家说声晚安。然后感谢大家就是听我们跟这个 Scott 这个国际品牌大使，然后也感谢这个汤马丁有播控这个时间给我们，然后让我们有学到这么多的一些这些 knowledge 的这种东西。OK， 好。Thanks, everybody. Have a good night, Scott, and we'll see you when we see you.
Good evening, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.